All right. Thank you for your patience. So my name is Dustin Bilheimer, and I'm joined today with my colleague Heidi Siegelbaum. I'm with the Washington State Department of Ecology, and Heidi's with the Washington Stormwater Center, run by the Washington State University. We both work on the Stormwater Strategic Initiative, and we're part of the Puget Sound Recovery Program, also the National Estuary Program. So I'm going to just give a quick intro to who we are and kind of what this microplastic strategy is about before we get started. We are the Stormwater Strategic Initiative. There's 3 strategic initiatives for Puget Sound recovery. There's also habitat and shellfish. We all have a different portfolio of implementation strategies that we manage. And I'm responsible for implementing the toxics in fish and the toxics in aquatic life implementation strategy. And our approach for this is, very much kind of a planning and visioning approach. We do a lot of coordination and connection, and we work with a large group of professionals in the Puget Sound recovery space. And we look forward to talking with everybody and getting everybody's experience and knowledge into our strategy development process. How we implement that is through use of the EPA's Puget Sound Geographic Program funding. And we like to fund programs that are innovation incubators and that catalyze future actions and remove barriers to solutions. These first 5 strategies are the strategies currently in the toxics and fish implementation strategy and include things like CEC research and monitoring, incentivizing swap outs, finding and fixing toxic hotspots. We get into some land use stuff in incentivizing redevelopment, and also look at accelerating in and near water cleanup. Microplastic pollution will be a new strategy that will come out of this workshop and the following work the rest of this year. And it will kind of help bridge the gap between microplastics and other contaminants of emerging concern and provide a step towards investing in projects that will have benefits to reduce microplastic pollution as well as CECs. So for today's agenda, Heidi and I are going to cover some of our purpose and objectives for today, and then we'll get started into the first session of speakers. That'll talk about things that help us understand health risks and applying that to formal actions, regulatory actions and such. We'll have a short break, and then our second session will be for talking about more on the ground implementation for microplastic and CEC exposure and risk reduction. And we've got a good slate of speakers for that too. We'll round out the morning with a large group discussion. We won't be breaking into small groups, but we'll have about 20 minutes or so to just get some of your reflections on the morning speakers. So here I'm going to kick it over to Heidi to talk about the next set of slides. Heidi, if you're off mute.
Yes. So good morning, everyone. So this is just a couple of slides about integration and particularly paying attention to human health. As you all may know, we are trained in highly specific fields, and that tends to add a siloing effect. And those silos do build literacy and expertise, but they can also get in the way of really good integrated holistic decision-making. And we started working on integration, particularly around this area, as well as land use and water and some of the integration factors that you can see on your left. It is hard, people get nervous about opening up whole new fields of practice, but we've made quite a bit of progress in the last couple of years. And then we were also very happy to join the One Health community that is led at a state level by our Department of Health. Next slide, please. So this is Dustin's handiwork using an AI-generated image. And in 2024, we first started entertaining these relationships and integration approaches by bringing together people involved with solid waste, tire wear particles, 6-ppdq, which you may be aware of, human health and aquatic tox practitioners. And what was really interesting is these are the notes that the different people put in a mural board, which is an online whiteboard, about how they saw the same perspective. It would be like if you gathered with your family and you all saw the same thing and you asked everybody what they just saw, you might get, different perspectives. Next slide, please. So, sorry, there's a lot of words here. So this kind of contains a lot of secrets. When we talk about adaptive management, really what we're talking about is changes in our context, new science, the effect of policy and politics on outcomes that can speed awareness, regulatory action, and galvanize human action at a more grassroots level. And it is ultimately about the weight of the evidence, which bears the burden of changes, in this case, to existing implementation strategies. But that course can sometimes be serpentine, and whether we like it or not, it can hinge on conversation. So in the last 5 years, there were a lot of behind the scenes, persuasive conversations, and in some cases sort of begging to consider human health integration into this body of work. And of course, the work that we do is connected intimately to the Puget Sound Partnership, who is responsible for Puget Sound recovery. And so it was very pleasing to us in the last year to see a full human health strategy that is going to be evolving through the science program at the partnership. Next slide, please. So this is just a very brief timeline. I'll go through this very quickly. There is a formative human well-being vital sign, which is an indicator that is really the genesis of the human health work, and that was penned in 2015. And so we tried to make the human health part of that more explicit. And then starting in 2023, we had more productive discussions about human health integration. And then in 2022, just to backcast a little bit, we have what are called chemical action plans that the Department of Ecology put together. And we have one for PFAS, which is a CEC. And then we were asked by a toxics pod that Dustin runs from one of the pod members to please pay attention to human health. And that was a really good explicit ask. Next slide, please. And then just to end cap this, a lot of things happen in 2025. The AA stands for the Action Agenda Update, which is basically the roadmap for Puget Sound recovery. And then the Puget Sound Ecosystem Monitoring Program developed a human health monitoring contract, and that led to the more developed human health strategy that's evolving now, the One Health Conference, which I just mentioned. And then we've been having workshops since 2024, but in June 2025, we had a specific health and microplastics workshop. And then our first microplastics workshop occurred in December. And that's it. Thank you.
Better unmute myself there. That makes a difference. Thanks, Heidi. So today we're here for workshop number 3, and we're looking at the human health exposure and risk reduction actions. And then we'll be talking later this morning about ideas for collaboration. I do have 2 more workshops in mind that are probably going to be this fall. So our workshop objectives today are really to explore the human health connections with microplastics and hear about examples of intervention strategies that address human health as well as toxics reduction. And I want to use the discussion time later to generate ideas for human health exposure and interventions that we might consider in the future and explore opportunities for collaboration. So why add human health objectives when we're focused on fish and the environment? Well, we want to reduce toxic chemical loads, including microplastics that make their way into the Puget Sound environment. That is our ultimate goal and objective. And toxic chemicals and microplastic pollution comes from consumer products, manufacturing, and our built environment. My theory is that we can be more successful if more people take actions to reduce toxic chemicals and plastics in our economy, and more people are going to take action if they recognize it helps their families and loved ones stay healthy. So really, that's where we're talking about this. It's to reach out to people who might, care about salmon and the health of Puget Sound, but what really motivates them to take action and reduce toxics are going to be recognizing that it's going to help them and their loved ones. So this is a slide from Maureen Swanson, who gave a presentation at our June 12, 2025 Toxics and Human Health Integration Workshop, one of them that Heidi had mentioned. And just wanted to, highlight here the important exposure pathways for human exposure. Often it's in the foods that we eat or connected to the foods that we eat or the beverages that we drink. It is in our indoor environments, in the dust floating around in our rooms from flooring, synthetic carpeting. You can get other kinds of chemicals of emerging concern through air and deposition as well. And then also incineration of plastics, especially if you've got places in California where you've got massive wildfires burning down homes and you've got homes full of plastics. That's releasing lots of toxic chemicals into the air and into the soils as well. And then when we're talking about like who of people are most affected, it's going to be generally children. They're smaller, they're on the ground more, they're putting their hands in their mouths, and their body weight to size ratio is much smaller than adults, so it affects the kids more. This is a slide from Dr. Elise Granick, who presented at our first workshop and talked about some of the microplastics, where they're being found, and there's a whole lot of research out there right now that are finding microplastics in all parts of the human body. And it's continuing to link microplastics to a lot of different human diseases, including dementia, cardiovascular disease, inflammation, increased cancer risk. There's developmental issues for kids and reproductive concerns. If you've seen the latest the plastic detox in Netflix, they talk about this, and they have one of the premier researchers leading that, and there's some good outcomes from that story too. The mechanisms of toxicity affecting humans. This is the slide from Dr. Sheila Safyana-Royana from the Seattle Children's Research Institute, who also spoke at our December 4th workshop. And just to, kind of show that there are lots of different mechanisms that microplastics can have on humans, including they're being a vector for other contaminants of emerging concern, where they can have chemicals like phthalates and PFAS and BPA and that attach to those microplastic particles and get transported into different parts of the human body and fish and as well and other critters. There's things that we can do though to help reduce that, both in terms of like policy and regulation, but in providing information to consumers. And Heidi and I dipped our toes into this a little bit about 2 years ago and put together a document that contains resources and links to some of the speakers that we'll hear from today and lots of others on how to reduce toxic products in your home. And that, we're really kind of linking plastics and other toxic chemicals together. Although modes of action, types of plastics, pathways in the environment, freight and transport, all of those things are going to be different. Don't mean to conflate that. So we are going to be talking about this area of the plastics life cycle today that I've got in the red box here. So we're really talking about the products that we use, how it affects people mostly. We'll hear about how some of that affects aquatic species. And then, there is environmental leakage of microplastics through stormwater, wastewater, air deposition, soil amendments, and food contact. That's all part of our exposure to microplastics. Workshop 2 focused on intervention actions around prevention and waste reduction and source control and cleanup. So the kinds of things we're going to be talking about today kind of fit more into this category of exposure and health risk reduction. Certainly there's lots of bleed over between intervention actions. They aren't just kind of easy, discrete buckets, but this will be our kind of organizing framework for discussing implementation actions that we'll want to support in the coming years. And then our discussion question for you to begin thinking about as we listen to our speakers this morning is, are there non-governmental organizations, academia, public health partnership opportunities we should think about leveraging to reduce human exposure and health risks? And with that, I'd like to start our session of presenters. Heidi, do you want to introduce our speakers?
Yes, I would love that. Thank you so much, Dustin. Our first speaker is Dichle Yardimchi, from the California Department of Toxic Substances Control, where California is doing some great, robust work. So let's welcome her. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. Hope everybody can see this. I'm going to go ahead and start. Do you guys see it okay?
Yes, it's good.
Okay,
it's good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. I'm Dichle Yardimchi. I'm a senior engineer with California Department of Toxic Substances Control, DTSC Safer Consumer Products Program, also known as SCP program. And all the information available in this presentation today is also publicly available on our website, and I do not have any conflict of interest to disclose. My presentation is going to focus on overview of DTSC and the Safer Consumer Products Program, and then we will talk about microplastics, their hazard traits and exposure potential. Then I will give you a quick overview of our preliminary research on microplastics in various consumer products, and I think we have a couple of minutes for Q&A at the end. Department of Toxic Substances Control is one of the agencies under California Environmental Protection Agency, Cal EPA, and Safer Consumer Products Program is one of the programs under DTSC. DTSC has two other programs that are called Site Cleanup and Hazardous Waste Management, and today we will talk about the Safer Consumer Products Program and our efforts on microplastics. In 2008, California Green Chemistry Law went into effect, which then created the Safer Consumer Products Regulations, and the Safer Consumer Product Regulations took effect on October 1st of 2013. And SCP's mission is to promote design of products that are safer for people and the environment. Our objectives include prioritizing, evaluating harmful chemicals in consumer products, and we also evaluate safer alternatives to those harmful chemicals while avoiding regulatable substitutes. This is a transparent and science-based decision making, and our regulations are enforceable throughout California. And our regulatory framework has 4 steps. The first step is the chemical list. This is a list of chemicals that are listed by certain authoritative bodies or DTSC because they are a potential of concern. And this is a list of chemicals that we can choose from to regulate in consumer products. And second step is priority products. These are consumer products that contain at least one chemical from step 1 that has the potential to cause harm. And for us to be able to list a priority product, it has to go through an official rulemaking process. And the third step is manufacturers of the priority products, once they're listed, evaluate safer alternatives to the chemicals in their products, and then submit those analyses to the department. And the last step is the regulatory response. This is where DTSC evaluates those alternative analysis that we receive from manufacturers, and then we determine possible regulatory actions to protect the human health and the environment. And you can find more details on our website of each step. So for DTSC to list a consumer product as a priority product via rulemaking, it must meet 2 criteria. The first criteria is there must be potential exposures to the chemical in that product. And the second criteria is 1 or more of those exposures must have the potential to contribute to or cause significant or widespread adverse impacts. And our process is a several-year process. It's not quick. It is pretty lengthy. We start off very first step as conducting research, and we do public engagement via public workshops and a public comment period. We then internally review those comments, the feedback we gathered from the public, and then we determine whether we need further research. And then we release a technical document called a profile. This summarizes the product chemical combination that we plan to regulate, and we propose the priority product. This all happens before the rulemaking process starts. And then we hold a pre-rulemaking workshop and another comment period to engage with the public further on that specific product chemical combination. Then our technical document has to go through an external scientific peer review, ESPR. This is also a mandatory step in our process. So before we initiate the rulemaking, this process can take up to 1.5 to 2 years. And then we initiate the rulemaking process, and the rulemaking process itself takes another year. So this is a several-year process. And now I'm going to switch gears and start talking about today's topic of microplastics, their hazard traits, and exposure potential. As most of you know in this meeting that there's no consensus on the definition of microplastics globally, but there's a consensus on the upper limit size of microplastics are generally defined as plastic particles that are less than 5 millimeter in their longest dimension. So microplastics are currently not on DTSC's chemical list. Last year, we initiated a rulemaking to add microplastics to our chemical list, and we expect this rulemaking to be finalized sometime this year. What this will give us the authority to potentially regulate consumer products that can generate microplastics once it goes into effect. But then those proposed priority products have to go through their own rulemaking, the entire process again. Microplastics are generally categorized either primary or secondary. Primary microplastics are the ones that are intentionally manufactured as microplastics to be used in certain products or applications, such as microbeads in personal care products, or they can be secondary, which means they are generated from fragmentation of larger plastics, such as tire wear particles. And most of these microplastics are persistent in the environment, and they're also mobile throughout the environmental media. And they can have additional hazard traits depending on their physical chemical properties, such as carcinogenicity, respiratory toxicity, or wildlife impairment. So this is a conceptual model which shows some of the sources, pathways, and environmental fate of microplastics once they're released from consumer products. This is not every single pathway, but it just gives you an idea they are everywhere. They can directly release from households into surface waters or other parts of the environment. They can also leach from landfill or wastewater treatment plants. They can come from biosolids and agricultural products. And they can also come from stormwater runoff and be transferred via air and dust or wind and rain. This makes microplastics widespread everywhere, and drinking water, in the air, in the food and beverages that humans consume. So there is a potential for exposure both for humans and other organisms, and also adverse impacts to the environment. So that's why we are concerned about microplastics, because they're persistent, mobile, and they're widespread in the environment. Because of their small size, they can be consumed by humans and animals. They can also be taken up by plants via soil and water. And microplastics exposure can cause adverse health impacts on humans and other organisms once they're exposed to microplastics. And there is potential for human exposure to microplastics because they have been detected both in air, and also they can be ingested from drinking water, food and beverages. Microplastics can also be transferred via dermal exposure while contacting products that have microplastics, or also from household dust. There is also potential for adverse human health impacts upon exposure to microplastics. However, the current state of science is still evolving, so there are more studies needed to understand the human health impacts of microplastics better. But there are several studies out there that detected microplastics in human blood, lungs, placenta, testes, breast milk, and stool samples. And some of the vulnerable populations include children, pregnant people, and workers that can be exposed to microplastics frequently on a daily basis. And there's also potential for environmental impacts and wildlife exposure to microplastics, because microplastics are detected in every ecosystem, air, water, and soil. And wildlife can also mistake microplastics for food because of their size, shape, and color. They may feed on microplastics selectively because they confuse it. They think it's food. Microplastics can also transfer throughout the food chain, and plants can uptake microplastics from water and soil. And there are several studies in literature showing there's potential for wildlife adverse impacts upon exposure to microplastics. These adverse impacts include physical stress and damage, changes in gut microbiota, inflammation, oxidative stress, and immune responses. And now we are going to talk about DTSC's efforts on microplastics so far. And I will give you a quick overview of types of the products we have looked at that has the potential to generate microplastics. Every 3 years, we release what we call a priority product work plan, and this lists of different product categories that we will be working on and potentially regulating products from within that 3-year time frame. Our most recent work plan is 2024-2026. We added a policy priority to reduce the release of microplastics into the environment. We also added a new product category called products that contain or generate microplastics. With this policy priority and the new product category, we started evaluating consumer products that has the potential to generate microplastics, but we are in the very first step in our process. If you recall from the beginning of my presentation, this is the first step. We start doing preliminary research and then engaging with the public after that. Before we started our research, we also looked at what others had done in the field. We reviewed regulations and work done by other government agencies, such as we reviewed Ocean Protection Council, California Ocean Protection Council statewide microplastic strategy, Cal Recycle Plastic Pollution Prevention and Packaging Producer Responsibility Act, as well as European Union Commission regulations on microplastics. We also had discussion meetings with industry, government agencies, academia, and nonprofit organizations that are subject matter experts in this field. Because microplastics are everywhere, we had to start somewhere with a list of products to look at. So after having these discussions, we started with a large list of products. And this initial list, after we conducted our research, adding our own findings and with the discussions of the subject matter experts in the field, we have narrowed our list to a more manageable number of products with the allocated resources and our targeted timelines. We conducted a further research on this narrow list of products, and then we held a public workshop December of last year. We also held a public comment period, which was closed earlier this year. And before the workshop, we released a background document. This is a technical document. It's a brief document which summarizes our preliminary findings on various consumer products that has the potential to generate microplastics. And this document also listed the types of products we evaluated. And then we held the public workshop, which has been recorded. And this document is also available along with the workshop recording on our website. We will share the links in the chat for those of you who are interested. We also held a written public comment period that was closed earlier this year. Those comments are also published on our website. If you're interested, you can review them as well. As I mentioned, after consulting with others in the field, we started with a large list of product categories and specific products. Some of these were large product categories such as food contact articles, and some were specific product types such as cigarette filters. As you can see, we looked at all kinds of different products, and some categories had multiple different product types underneath them. After doing our preliminary research, because this was a huge list, we narrowed it down based on our initial findings to a more manageable number of list of products. We then conducted additional research on those products. And our narrowed list of products included artificial turf infill, children's toys containing primary microplastics, plastic film mulch, single-use cigarette filters, water-based interior wall paints, cleaning products, and food contact articles. For the cleaning products, we looked at 3 different sources of microplastics. One of them was intentionally added polymers in laundry and dishwashing detergents. The other one was polymeric fragrance microcapsules in laundry detergents and fabric softeners. And then the third one was water-soluble polymers in laundry and dishwashing detergent pods. For food contact articles, we evaluated 6 different food contact articles, which are plastic beverage bottles and caps, baby feeding bottles, wrappers for snacks and candy, cling wraps and films, tea bags, and polystyrene foam foodware. For the sake of time allocated for my presentation today, I'm not going to go into each product in detail, our findings, but you can find those in our background document and also in our public workshop recording. And if you have specific questions, I'll try to get to them today during the Q&A. And the big takeaways are many consumer products contain or have the potential to generate microplastics. Most of these microplastics are persistent, mobile, and widespread in the environment. And there is potential for human and wildlife exposure and also adverse impacts to humans, wildlife, and the environment from exposure to microplastics. And some of these products, their industry is already, and others already working on alternatives, safer alternatives to these microplastics in some of these products. And next steps for DTSC, we are in the process of reviewing the public comments. We received 44 public comments that are published on our website, so pretty lengthy. We are going over them. We want to make sure we gather all the feedback, and then we are going to determine if we need additional research. Then we're going to prioritize some of those products as to propose as priority products via rulemaking that has the potential to generate microplastics. And then types of data that could be very useful to us is to backtrack the source of microplastics once they end up in the environment. It will be very valuable for us if we can link the source of those microplastics to specific product types for us to propose regulations, which is pretty challenging to do with most of these products. Polymer types also could be really helpful. That can indicate what types of products they may be coming from, and also human exposure routes to microplastics would also strengthen our argument when we go through the route of the rulemaking to propose some of these products as priority products. And this was a large team effort, so I would like to thank everyone who made this possible, and also the subject matter experts in the field that we have consulted with during this process. And this is my contact information right here. We also have an SDP email if you would like to reach out to us that way. And you can get updates about our program by joining our e-list, as well as we also post our career opportunities on our website. And that concludes my presentations today. I'm going to come out of the presenter mode so I can see everyone. So just leave it there.
That was great, Deechle. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. We have a time for some questions. Amy has a question around where are we looking for narrowing product types, the amount of microplastics generated, alternatives, exposure. Like, is there a narrowing mechanism?
Right. So different products, we looked at different things. Some of these we came across, there were some regulations already proposed or in place that we didn't think it wouldn't make sense to like handle it in our program. It was really case by case depending on the product. Some of them were low-hanging fruit. We thought this would be a really great opportunity for us to potentially propose those as priority products. Or some of them didn't have any alternatives. So our program is really great about promoting safer alternatives. So if there are nobody working on the alternatives or a certain product, our program would be a great fit for that. So it really changed, like depending on it wasn't like one criteria. So depending on the different product types, we narrowed it down based on what we found, and also by talking to others in the field as well.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? You can come off mute and speak if you'd like, or you can put your questions in the chat. Does anybody have any questions?
I can monitor the chat and try to answer if you have any.
Okay. And of course, you can just contact Deechle yourself directly, or you can write Dustin and I anytime in an email, and we'll make sure that your questions are answered. Thank you very much. That was very interesting.
Yeah, I see.
Oh, wait, I think Alan has a question. Alan, go ahead.
Yes, just a question, thinking about the omnipotence of the issue. Has anybody done any work to sort of categorize volumes produced over time and then associated population-based issues like ADHD and other things to show a broader impact?
Sure. So that type of data would be very useful to us, but at this, I guess I should back up. So we only need to show there is potential for exposure and adverse impacts. Even if we can't like quantify, we can still regulate these products. So that makes us our program very unique. So the bar is pretty low. We don't need to show any kind of like risk assessment or anything like that to be able to regulate. There are, I know Ocean Protection Council's microplastics strategy, they looked at some of the larger sources of microplastics. We also look at their list, so we look at those product categories as well. So, and when it comes to human health impacts, they're not very well understood where the science is now. And even the studies that are currently published, there's some debate going on among researchers with the methods are not standardized, and also the QA/QC protocols, they're not following it in the labs when they collect this data. So that is a gray area. That being said, we can also use wildlife exposure data or impacts to environment. So it doesn't only need to be human health impacts for us to regulate these products. So we have a broader chance of pushing the regulations. But certainly any data that is quantified and linked to a human health impact, that would be very useful to us as well. And just to answer your question, we have not done that in our process right now. Once we move into priority product proposals, we are going to spend a little more time to do a deeper dive into research. I know that's not the exact answer to your question, but we can still regulate them even without the absence of very specific data.
Okay.
If I could
Thank
just
you.
add one thing, Heidi knows it, but basically, there are a lot of people that do not take kindly to regulations without some understanding more specifically of its impacts. And so I'm just trying to make sure the communication is more than just, we think you ought to do this. It's sufficient information to change those who are sort of status quo people, if you will.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ellen. I see, Dr.
Nick.
Scott, you got your hand up there. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just had a comment. I really applaud the efforts of the state of California. I was part of an expert panel there back from 2008 to 2012, and we listed 3 of our dirty dozen chemicals in 2012 as plasticizers and phthalates, BPA. I really think it is really interesting, and it follows on the earlier question. When we look at the major sources of plastic, like food packaging at grocery stores, if you look at drugs, things like that, that's going to take a long-term process. And what I was thinking, I just heard on the news yesterday that the president has now put some of the AI industry under the government purveyance. And I wondered if some of the states like California could get with the AI industry and start a long-term process to look for innovative solutions to replace plastics, because this is going to take a long time to really make a dent. And just a suggestion, y'all are right there in California where you have a lot of AI. And obviously, I just would point that out. It's going to take a lot more than AI, but the more folks you can engage, the more federal funding you bring to this, greater potential for success. So just a suggestion.
Okay.
Great
Thank you.
suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. We have one question from Heather Trim, and then I think we have to move on, but feel free to put your additional questions in the chat. And then after today's meeting, we'll have them answered. Thank you. Heather, go ahead.
Yeah, hey, Dustin, thank you. That was a great presentation. Dustin, I don't know if you've seen the email, but there's a whole hunk of people who can't come in because it's Teams, and there are only 52 of us here. If you want to shift to another Zoom or something else, we could do that at the break.
We can, Heather. That's why
we
we're
could.
on Teams.
There are only 52 of us.
Thanks for letting us know.
I mean, I could send you a Zoom link. I mean, there's a whole hunk of people who aren't here because of the Teams thing.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
We did.
Ironically, my Outlook is like updating and taking forever, so I'm not seeing all of the emails. I am trying to let people in, or when I do get messages. If you know of people,
I can email back
to
it's all the Oregon people, so I can email them and say you can't do it, but
Heather, we saw it. We can't, it's at this point, we really can't do that. We're recording today. There will be other workshops, and there's ongoing meetings all the time, even between. So unfortunately, we had no notice, and this also happened at 8 o'clock last night. So we were caught off guard via technical problems. So that it's, yeah. So
feel free to forward the invite to them and see if maybe that would make a difference in their accessing Teams. Yeah, I apologize for the additional trouble this morning, but it'll be too much.
It's
disruption to
technology. It
switch.
happens. It's the world we're
Yeah,
currently
yeah.
living in. So I think we have to move on. I'm sorry at this point. And so let's introduce Jeff Scott, who is from the Arnold School of Public Health from the University of South Carolina. Welcome, Jeff. Good to see you.
Glad to be here this morning, and thank you for the invite to participate, and really looking forward. So do I bring my slides up or do y'all do it?
No,
If you could bring
you
up
can
your
put them
slides
up.
and
Yeah,
share.
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see if I can share. Let's see here.
If it would work better for you, Dr. Scott, I can
I'm
bring up your
trying to get
presentation.
here. I got it now. Let me find the link to share. It's up top, right? There we go. There we go. I got it now. Okay. So thank you so very much. It's a joy to be with you today. And we go to the top here and we'll get going. So today, the title of my talk is essentially microplastic effects on the ecosystem and human health. And as Heidi said, I'm at the Arnold School of Public Health. I want to acknowledge several of my graduate students, Bonnie Erdl, who will be speaking later, and Lola Renauer and Lieutenant Colonel J.R. Viata, who all contributed along with a number of undergraduates with some of this information I'm going to share with you today. Oops, let me try to get rid of all the people I messed up here. Let's see. How do I go? I'm sorry. How do I get rid of all the people here? I'm sorry. Can somebody help me with that?
Oh, well, we can see your slide.
I can't. That's the problem.
Oh, let's see.
Here, I think I got it. I was trying to go to just me. If you can do that. Sorry, I'm not that familiar with Teams. So.
Yeah.
Any help, Dustin, is appreciated.
I think you can go to view. Go to view up top.
View. Okay. Speaker. Here we go. I think I get that. Did that do it?
It looks good on our end. Can you see your slide?
No, I'm gonna stop sharing and go back. Let me go back more time. Maybe that'll do it. I'll just not worry about it.
I'll also pull up your slideshow here too, so I could display it and then you'd be able to see it more easily.
I'm gonna jump right in. The problem is going across the screen. And let me see if I can. Down to one person. So I think that's you, Dustin. So I think we're good.
Okay.
Let me see if I can move it up. There we go. Got it off the screen now. So what are microplastics? Well, they're basically fossil fuel components, mostly coal, about 67% of production, petroleum, and then natural gas. They produce these lightweight products that are transparent, durable. All of us know. In 1964, I was at the World's Fair. I saw my first demonstration of a Teflon frying pan. We had one a year later because I had to wash the dishes. I thought it was the greatest thing God ever invented. But we now know that plastics are everywhere. And so particularly the polyethylene terephtalates, which are in water bottles, the PVCs that are in garden hoses, polystyrene that are in food containers, and the polymethyl methacrylate, which are in your shatterproof windows, which is sort of important along our coast with hurricanes. So we have primary microplastics and secondary microplastics. And we've heard about those earlier, but they're produced, the plastics are actually produced by a polymerization reaction, adding either a dimer and two monomers to form a plastic, or a single monomer and a dimer to form the plastics. The secondary microplastics are created by biodegradation, photooxidation, thermo-oxidative degradation, thermal degradation, and hydrolysis. This cartoon sort of shows that. We have our large plastic water bottles, your clothing, your nurdles and your clothing are your primary microplastics. We no longer allow the some of the consumer products with these microbeads. I'll get to that in a minute. And then we have the fragments and the tireware particles. Now, this is what a typical beach looks like in Hawaii, in the middle of the garbage patch in the Pacific Gyre. And microplastics are plastic particles that are less than 5 millimeters in length. And that's bad news if you're an oyster, because that's exactly the particle size they feed. They don't discriminate between, healthy particles. And so they are, for every microplastic particle, for every algae particle they're ingesting 6 microplastics. So think of that for a minute. Every 6 mouthfuls of food you got to throw out. The oysters are really under duress. So we can take a look and see the weathering of these microplastic particles in this little cartoon. And we know the physical sand and abrasion plus the ocean energy just churns those plastics into smaller and smaller particles. I was glad to see the cigarette butts were on the list in California. They're the major source of marine debris, according to NOAA, during our surveys back in the 2018-2019 period. So we have our nurdles, our microfibers, as your primary, your tireware particles, and your fragments. Most of your fish around the world have nurdles. You can see them in the mouth of this fish in the sediments. Nurdles are microplastic pellets that are manufactured to develop other microplastic particles. They include car parts, containers, bottles, artificial Christmas trees, artificial turf. Because of the versatility the nurdles hold, they are commonly found on land, in the ocean, and freshwater bodies. They're primarily made of polyethylene and polypropylene. Now, over land, the nurdles can spill and wash into waterways. In Charleston, we had $1 million fine in Charleston Harbor against a company that was spilling nurdles into Charleston Harbor. In the oceans, we had a shipwreck off Sri Lanka in 2021 that spilled a large amount.
Let's just start this room.
Yeah. Oh, where are you going?
I'm going.
If we could ask folks to make sure you're muted,
Okay,
please.
I thought there was a question. Okay,
No
there are
problem.
11 million nurdles that are estimated to end up in the ocean every year. 1,680 tons of nurdles were spilled in the shipwreck of the Express Pearl off Sri Lanka, and 600 nurdles are used to make one plastic bottle. Now, we also have the artificial turf and other sources, and I'm going to move right along. I think I beat that one to death. I did want to mention the 2015 Microbeads Free Water Act that essentially prohibited microbeads to be packaged, manufactured, or sold anywhere in the U.S. That does not mean people cannot buy them abroad, and they can. Now, one of the other things I want to mention to you is that the majority of studies have shown that 4 to 23 times more microplastic pollution ends up in terrestrial environments. That's because air deposition is our largest source of exposure, and that air deposition falls onto the land. We also land upon large amounts of sewage, which adds additional microplastics to crops that we grow and our agricultural areas. We know that this affects the health of the soil. It affects the microarthropods, nematodes. It can change the permanent health of the microbiome in the soils. Earthworms burrow differently. They're hyperactive, and it affects their fitness because of the plastics. We know that these plastics can leach into the groundwater, and they're applied with sewage as fertilizer on many crops. Our secondary microplastics, most of the microplastics in the marine environment are secondary microplastics. They're small pieces of plastic formed by breaking off the larger pieces. And this would include chips off plastic utensils, lids, other single-use plastic products like those cigarette butts. Now, in Tokyo Bay, 86% of the plastics in fish were fragments. And this is really important because we know about the large amount of plastics in the Pacific Gyre, and we know that many species of fish are getting exposed. Now, I want to talk about the microfibers as well. Every wash load of clothes you wash produces 700,000 microfibers. That's going to your wastewater treatment plant. Some of that is discharged in the effluent. Some of that is going to be in the sludge, which will be applied to land. So these microfibers are everywhere. And then when we look at our tire wear particles, basically, they are basically in 2018, we were part of one of 4 national centers on oceans and human health. And Dr. John Weinstein of the Citadel broke the story about how tire wear particles are the dominant microplastic particle we were finding in coastal areas in National Geographic in November of 2018. And that makes sense. Half of the US population almost lives in the coastal zone. And that means half of the cars are there. It also means most of the trucks are there because they're transitioning the imports and exports back and forth to our ports. So coastal areas are under attack more so than other parts of the U.S. It's a little different in Kansas, Toto. Now, if we take a look at microplastics around Columbia, this is part of an award-winning film from Microplastics from the Midlands to the Coast that won the Hootie and the Blowfish Foundation Environmental Conservation Award. Those blue bars are microfibers. So on the left-hand side of that screen, you'll notice that the dominant particles coming out of wastewater treatment plants are microfibers. On the right-hand side, those green bars are tire wear particles. So what do you see? We see major amounts of tire wear particles along heavily traversed roadways. Now, in Seattle, y'all have had a significant issue with a chemical that leaches from tires called 6-PPD quinone. And these are some toxicity values for that compound. And I believe this is coho salmon. And using the environmental levels to calculate an LC50. And then on the bottom, that's the actual LC50 curve, I think, with the salmon. And so what we see is that there are levels in the environment that are causing toxicity to fish, and that has been the case in Puget Sound. And this is another figure from that paper. And as you can see, the environmental levels on the first figure A, those blue, green, and purple boxes, those are the levels in the environment. The solid horizontal line is the max. That 250 is sort of the minimum. And then you'll see the LC50s are all below that. So this clearly means organisms are being exposed to this chemical, which can be toxic. And they give you the amounts of 6-PPD coming from cars and trucks predicted. Okay, there in that orange. So you can see it's a big issue. Now, Bonnie Ertl will be speaking in just a bit. And Bonnie's master's thesis, Bonnie took shellfish from all of our state shellfish harvesting areas in South Carolina, working with Dr. Weinstein for her master's thesis. And she showed that the dominant microplastics in oysters are textile microfibers and tire wear particles, about 16 particles per oyster. And in a serving of a dozen oysters, that's about 251 particles. Bonnie also looked at the depuration of these different particles, and the slowest, and the reason for this, we work a lot with the Interstate Shellfish Sanitation Program. I just have given 2 consecutive talks at the Pac Rim Regional Meeting the last 2 years, and we are looking at depuration because if it comes to regulations, the oyster industry does have regulations for depuration for bacteria, and it appears that depuration would reduce the load, not completely, and the slowest particles that depurate are the tire wear particles, which is a concern. Now, these microplastics can release inside your body. They release phthalate esters and bisphenol A. Both of those were on the California expert panel list back in 2012 of the Dirty Dozen emerging contaminants. And basically, they can leach into the tissues of organisms. One of my other graduate students, Miranda Zyback, is looking at the effects of phthalates and BPA on dolphins. And she finds it affects the thyroid. She's looking at levels in the blood plasma, and she is finding that ones with high levels have altered immune systems, particularly the thyroid gland and a couple of other portions of the hormone system. Basically, you have long retention time. This slows down microplastics, slows down the passage of food in your gut. We know that chemicals like DDT, hexachlorobenzene, PCBs, pharmaceuticals, all attached to microplastics. We know Vibrios, microbes, leading cause of death in seafood, absorb the microplastics. And we also know that a 2022 study showed microcystin, some of our toxic algal toxins, absorb the microplastics. This is a study looking at the Vibrios from Ryan Leighton's dissertation, Dr. Ryan Leighton with NIH now. And Ryan shows that basically the Vibrios are some of the dominant species. And basically that graph on the right is showing you that these produce highly virulent strains of Vibrio that form biofilms and are cause more serious sepsis type infections. Now, in looking at plastics in fish, we have found globally that about 60% of all fish have microplastics, looking at 198 species in 24 countries. We know algae, it affects the photosynthetic activity in algae, and invertebrates like Daphnia, it affects their reproduction and mobility. It obstructs the digestive system in zooplankton and many benthic organisms, and it inhibits the growth of microorganisms such as bacteria. That may be a good thing with the Vibrios. Now, I wanted to give you the results of a toxicity test where we dosed basically Micro Sierra, which is Lingbia wallii, if you've heard the old name. It produces saxitoxin and 5 other different Lingbia toxins, a highly toxic compound. And so you can see that the 96-hour LC50 is increased by a factor of 4 with the addition of tire wear particles in fathead minnows. That's a very significant finding. Next, I want to talk about exposure to other chemicals like pyrethroid insecticides. Bifenthrin is the most frequently detected insecticide in the United States. 80% of sites in Australia have it. It has a half-life of 251 to 1950 days, so it persists. This is the results of a 96-hour toxicity test where we exposed grass shrimp, Paleomenides pugio, to bifenthrin in the green line. The blue line is the presence of tire wear particles with the bifenthrin, and the orange line is the presence of microfibers. So initially, during the first 48 hours of the experiment, the tire wear particles enhance the toxicity of the bifenthrin. Why is that noteworthy? Runoff events occur with high doses, and that exposure is within the first 24 to 48 hours after a rain event. So that means we could be seeing increased toxicity during runoff events. But you'll notice by the end of the 96 hours of exposure, there was no significant difference in toxicity. So if you concluded based upon the 96-hour LC50, you would say, well, there's no effect. Well, maybe not. One of the things we noticed at very low doses that were non-toxic to our grass shrimp in the exposure to the bifenthrin and microfibers is the shrimp began to jab their rostrum against the side of the container. That is hyperactivity. Now, Kuntz demonstrated 12 different behaviors in grass shrimp, and this sudden jab reflex, which is what this is called, is their most extreme response. And this is the equivalent of banging your head against the wall if you're a human. And so at 10 nanograms per liter, 13% of the shrimp did this. In a dose-dependent manner at 18 nanograms per liter with the textile microfibers, they did this. In exposure to bifenthrin by itself, they did not elicit any of this behavior. And in the tire wear particles, they did not, with the bifenthrin, they did not elicit this behavior. The big deal is this only occurred with the textile microfibers. And this suggests that this may cause this hyperactivity. Other studies in delta smelt and some other studies have found similar effects on behavior, and other studies have found effects on gene expression. So I don't have time to go into all that, but I just want you to know that this is, I think, a very important issue. Earlier, we had a question about attention deficit hyperactivity, I believe. And attention deficit hyperactivity affects 11% of all children between the age of 4 and 17 in the US, about 6.4 million children. And globally, that number is 8 to 12%, depending upon where you are. Boys are 3 to 4 times more likely to be diagnosed than girls. Early symptoms include inability to pay attention. And I also want to make the point I failed to mention in the grass shrimp study. I think at the higher doses of bifenthrin, they were intoxicated with the bifenthrin, and that activity was not elicited. So I think that's really important. It's at low doses. That's what really concerns me with that finding with our study in the shrimp. And so there may be modifiable factors such as pesticides that may affect hyperactivity. Rutgers scientists at Emory and Rochester Medical Center and Wake Forest exposed mice to the pyrethroid deltamethrin in utero and breastfeeding. And basically what they found is hyperactivity. And most interesting, males were more affected than females. That sounds familiar. And if we look at the epidemiology data for children exposed to pyrethroids, those boys and girls with detectable levels of pyrethroid in their urine were twice as likely to have ADHD as those without detectable levels. Boys were much more sensitive than girls. The odds ratio for boys was 3, which means it was 3 times higher than it was in girls. This finding of greater sensitivity in boys is agreement with that Rutgers study in mice and other studies. So how much microplastics are we exposed to? 5 grams a week. Pull out your credit card. That's how much each of us are exposed to every week. 50 of those a year, plus what's absorbed to them. And this co-exposure with other chemicals is a $64 question. We don't know. There's very little data. Now, we also find it in bottled water, beer. I'm not giving up my beer. It's mainly in the air. That's our biggest source of exposure. In terms of protein, the highest level of exposure is in seafood. And I noticed that was on the California list, so that's good. Maybe depuration can help with that. Now, finally, I want to talk about the nanoplastic study. In cardiac patients undergoing surgery, they can actually detect the differences between microplastic related plaques and other plaques. And those with nanoplastic plaques, related plaques, were twice as likely to have a heart attack as those without. So this is starting to take on more and more useful information. Now, I want to close on talking about, if you want more information on human health effects, please go to the European Union Mindero Monaco Commission's report on plastics and human health. Dr. Phil Landrigan, one of the world's foremost environmental toxicologists, and a distinguished panel, including my good friend John Stegeman from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, were co-authors on this. And what they found is that plastics have resulted by 2015 in over $250 billion in additional healthcare costs. In the US, the cost of healthcare costs for disease and disability from plastics, PBDE, polybrominated diethyl ether, flame retardants, bisphenol A, and some of the other plastics exceeded $920 billion. And they also increased the amount of carbon dioxide emissions by 1.96 gigatons, which cost us another $341 billion in healthcare costs. Some of the effects we see are troubling, particularly in young children, the development of the brain, and some of this hyperactivity that I mentioned earlier. I don't have time to go into all this because I'm running out of time, but I will go to one last slide and kind of wrap up. The folks we should be paying attention are the plastic production workers. Those are the increased risks they have. The workers producing plastic textiles, we've known for a long time they have bladder cancer, other cancers, plastic recycling workers, and then residents of fence line communities adjacent to plastic production and waste disposal sites. I thank you for your time today, and I'll be glad to take any questions you may have.
We have a question from Tanya about next steps to better understanding sublethal impacts of exposure to tire wear particles.
Yeah.
And then Tanya also asked about revisiting the oyster study. Tanya,
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what, do you understand what she's asking?
Yeah, I think I do. I really think the study should be with pervasive chemicals and things that we are seeing that are high levels of exposure. The question we do not know is, are the plastics adding to those or reducing the exposure? We don't know. Are they additive in terms of toxicity, synergistic? You know, if you're a shrimp and you start beating your head and making noise, those animals are all ecologically dead, even though they are not dead in terms of the mortality in our experiment. And so this gravely concerns me with the prevalence of just a couple of studies we've done to scratch the surface. And we need more and more studies being done by folks. Whatever compound you can throw in a beaker and do a simple study, you might learn an awful lot. And I would really encourage folks that are environmental toxicologists, the more of those types of studies, the greater we're going to build our information on this particularly additive effect. What I'm really concerned is what I said earlier. At high doses, I think the animals may be intoxicated because of the other chemicals, but at low doses, the effects of the plastics come through, and that's what our kids are exposed to. So low doses. And so that's what really worries me. We need to understand that low dose phenomenon.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Unfortunately, we have to move on, but if you've got questions,
thank you so much for having me
thank
today.
you. That was great. And if you've got questions for Jeff, please put them in the chat. Next up is Bonnie Ertel from NOAA and the University of South Carolina. Welcome.
Hi, thank you guys for having me today. As a brief overview, I'm going to give you a bit of a background of my experience in microplastic and research over the last 10 years, from the Great Pacific Garbage Patch to the stomachs of stranded marine mammals. As stated, I am a contractor working with NOAA's National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science and also a PhD candidate at the University of South Carolina with Dr. Scott, who we just heard from. So my research in microplastics started over 10 years ago in the summer of 2016 with Sea Education Association. And with this organization, as an undergraduate from the University of Chapel Hill, I did an independent project on marine debris. And we were sailing throughout the Pacific Ocean from Tahiti to Hawaii, which includes the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which we have just heard about and you're likely familiar with from previous interactions. But I think there's a bit of a misconception about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And while there are certain areas of the Pacific that have extremely high levels of macroplastic pollution, the majority of the plastics that are floating within the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which you can see pictured here, this was taken in the middle of it, the bigger problem at hand is microplastics, which we have heard quite a bit about. So I'm going to skip most of this introduction, but you can see some photos here of different types that I've found throughout my career. And microplastics are particularly concerning because they not only contain toxic additives within themselves, but they can also absorb contaminants from the environment and serve as a vector for a variety of contaminants of emerging concern within the aquatic environment. And so seeing firsthand the amount of microplastics was really impactful and has stuck with me. So after that study abroad, I completed my honors thesis mapping marine debris, so larger macroplastic in marshes in North Carolina. And then I also exposed fiddler crabs to microplastic beads. At this point, I was interested in how these particles are being formed and then incorporated into the coastal ecosystem. I then completed after I graduated, I completed an internship sampling microplastics from Blue Hill Bay within the Gulf of Maine. I did this work with a nonprofit where we went out weekly and sampled surface water. You can see here was the plankton tow that we used. We also just used grab water with mason jars. and documented the spatial and temporal abundance of microplastics in this region. I then started my master's at the Citadel, which is how I got connected with Dr. Scott, as well as Dr. John Weinstein was my primary supervisor at the Citadel. And we had a number of different projects, and I'll just touch very briefly on some of the high-level overview of each of these. So one of my main projects was looking at nuisance floodwater, which in Charleston happens very frequently. You can see here this graph demonstrates how over time we see more frequent flooding of our streets, and this can just occur on a sunny day, and it's from tidal overflow onto our low-lying streets. And we were curious if this could be a pathway for microplastics as well as tire particles in the coastal environment. And what we found is that there were high levels in the street floodwater, but the tidal creeks did not receive all of the microplastics, which led us to hypothesize that the nearby sediment within the salt marsh is acting as a trap, kind of like a nature-based solution for microplastics. So that work has been since followed up and demonstrated that indeed our sediment can act as a trap. So that was one of our work. We also looked at microplastics in oysters, as Dr. Scott shared. We did a survey of our state shellfish grounds to determine the abundance in the natural environment. And then we did exposure studies to demonstrate the uptake and depuration of particles over time. For this, I fed them fragments, fibers, and crumb rubber being a surrogate for tire wear particles. And unfortunately, the oysters readily uptook crumb rubber, and they did not depurate them as well as the other microplastics, which leads us to suspect that there is a size and shape and maybe even polymer dependent relationship between uptake with oysters. But one important thing that I want to point out for this crowd, especially with this depuration, our goal here is to reduce human exposure, and with other contaminants, a depuration in clean seawater has been used to reduce contaminant exposure from ingestion, because with oysters, typically we're just eating the whole animal. And then lastly, while I was at the Citadel, I worked on a study looking at PPE degradation in the salt marsh, where we put out gloves, masks, and wipes. This was during the pandemic. And we studied how they break down over the very short time in the salt marsh. They began to release microplastic in as little as 2 weeks. We also looked at atmospheric deposition of tire particles from just the air. This is nearby a very large bridge we have here in Charleston, and we did document tire wear particles just in the air that we breathe as well. So then when I finished my master's, I was working on writing, I was teaching, and prepared to start a PhD program at USC. And then I heard about truly my dream job, working at the Hollings Marine Lab, which you can see here. And this was a position to be a contractor with NOAA. And I applied and was able to get that position, and also still work on my PhD at the USC Arnold School of Public Health. And so the research I'm working on is with the Coastal Marine Mammal Assessments Program. Government loves our acronyms, so I'm within NCOS, and this project is monitoring microplastic ingestion in stranded marine mammals' gastrointestinal tracts. And when I was little, I always wanted to be a marine biologist, and this looks a little bit different than I expected, but I really do love it. Primarily because I get to involve different aspects that I enjoy. So I have a background primarily in environmental health with like microplastics, but now I'm incorporating animal health and trying to understand what that could mean for humans who also reside in the coastal environment. And so dolphins, we all love them, but they are more than just charismatic megafauna. They can also be studied as ecosystem sentinels, as long-lived apex predators that live and eat in some of the coastal areas that we also live and eat. So in Charleston, we have a local population of about 300 Tamanins bottlenose dolphins that live here year-round, and that's our primary study focus. We know that microplastics are ingested by dolphins primarily through trophic transfer. However, there's no long-term studies at the population level, and typically they're limited by small sample sizes. But ultimately, quantifying microplastics in dolphins can help us inform risk assessments by providing environmentally relevant exposure levels. And I hope that this graphic shows up, because so with dolphins, we know they eat a lot of fish, and due to a variety of reasons, they will strand and die, which is unfortunate, but we can go out with permits and collect a variety of samples, including the stomach and intestines, which I can then bring back into the lab. And you can see me here separating out the intestine, and I'm measuring the entire length and the entire mass of the entire gastrointestinal tract. But primarily I'm interested in the contents within. And so to make it a little bit more manageable, I do divide the entire gastrointestinal tract into 8 equal length sections. And I don't have time to go into all of my methods here. I'd be happy to chat more after, but in general, I'm taking the contents and sieving them, digesting any biological material to then filter and analyze using visual and vibrational spectroscopy, specifically Raman and micro-FTIR. I am doing blinks along the way to control for any contamination. And overall, I'm primarily finding clear fibers. You can see almost 87%. But I am also finding a variety of microplastics, including tire wear particles, in almost a third of the dolphins I've analyzed, which I don't think I mentioned this before, but I have about 66 dolphins from the Charleston Harbor over 10 years included in this analysis of a variety of different ages and different demographic variables. The most common polymers I've found have been polypropylene, nylon, and polyethylene. And most interesting take-home point from my data that I want to highlight is that I found higher concentrations in these young dolphins. So here on the y-axis, we have microplastics per gram, which has been standardized by the weight of the GI contents. And then the x-axis is animal length, going from small to larger animals. And what you can see is that these fetuses and unweaned calves have statistically significantly higher levels of microplastics than the subadults and even the adults, indicating that microplastic transfer is occurring, or maternal transfer of microplastics is likely occurring. And by looking at the population level, we can better understand which part of the population is most vulnerable for exposure. And then also we're looking at the fish that these dolphins ingest. So even though the young calves have higher levels, we do know that the adults are also exposed. And this can give us an idea tying it back into human health. So we've taken 5 of the local dolphins' preferred prey species from the Charleston Harbor and analyzed the gut, the muscle, and the fish. And as you can see here, this can help me answer different questions of trophic transfer. And so this is, I think, one of my last slides demonstrating. This is very preliminary. I have not looked at all of my fish per each category, but it's demonstrating that microplastics are capable of trophic transfer. However, the majority are within the gastrointestinal tract, which luckily humans do not eat. So by removing that gastrointestinal tract and only consuming the muscle fillet, that could be a means of reducing microplastic exposure from certain types of seafood species. So overall, in conclusion, our data has suggested that dolphin calves are the most vulnerable to microplastic exposure. If you're interested in learning more about this study, you can use this QR code here to explore a story map we made. But we're continuing to look into the influence of diet, and ultimately quantifying microplastic ingestion in these species can help provide environmentally relevant exposure levels and transport pathways of these microplastics in the coastal region using a One Health perspective. And I would just like to thank all of the people, because this research is not something I have done on my own, but it takes a village. And I'm happy to take any questions if we have time now, but if not, I can be reached at my email, and then I have a website that includes all of the research that I went over today if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Very interesting and great, great historical arc as well. Any questions for Bonnie? We probably only have time for one question before we go on a quick break. Morgan asked if there is quick access to the story map. If you could put that in the chat, that would be great.
Yeah, Dr. Scott, I see you raising your hand.
Yeah, just a very quick comment. The dolphins are very interesting sentinel species. Unlike humans, that we compress 10% of the blood to the blood-brain barrier, with their diving reflex, they compress 90%. So they're going to be the most exposed population in our coastal environments from all sources of exposure. And so I really hope folks will continue to support the Oceans and Human Health Program at NSF and NIH, because the dolphins are really going to play a role in helping us unravel some of these human health effects, I believe. So I just wanted to point that out, because they are a very unusual indicator species.
Thank you. I know we have some porpoises here in Puget Sound. The southern resident killer whales are kind of one of the marine mammals, the megafauna that we are most interested in here. I wonder if future conversations could talk about, what
Well,
opportunities with them.
I was part of a panel at Washington Sea Grant. Russell Callender, my former boss at NOAA, was director then, and I know I'm very familiar with the Salish Sea population. Maternal transfer from generation to generation appears to be a significant factor. And so they're in their third generation of exposure. And it's a stair-step effect. With each succeeding generation, the levels get higher.
I'm sorry, just a second here. Okay, I'm not sure who that was. I'm sorry, just gonna go ahead and finish.
Just wanted to point that out. I think y'all are prime to really go and look at that exposure in that population. That's probably the most well-studied population. Plus, as I recall, Sea Grant has a model they've developed to predict future populations, which would be very helpful, and I think really warrant, and NOAA may be willing to kick in some more funding with some of the other federal agencies. So I just point that out.
Thanks. Those are good ideas for some near-term future research actions.
Yeah. So
Bonnie.
thank you. So maybe time to move into a truncated break, Dustin?
Yeah. I know our next speaker is going to have kind of a tight timeline. So when do we need to make sure we restart by, Heidi?
I don't know, Megan, you're on the call now. What do you want, a 5-minute break before starting? I know that you were time constrained.
I'm pretty good, so go ahead and take that break. It's fine.
Okay. Welcome. Another East Coaster. Hello. Okay, we'll take a quick break here, and then you can go hydrate and relax, and then we'll introduce you and we can move on. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to get started here with our next round of speakers.
All right. Hello, everybody. Next, we are going to welcome Megan Wolf from the Physician Scientist Network, addressing plastics or PSNAP. And welcome, Megan.
Sorry, I'm a little challenged. I'm a Zoom user. I'm like, this is becoming like a Mac or a PC thing,
I know.
right?
Yes. We had our disaster last night at 8 o'clock at night.
Oh boy.
Unanticipated. Yeah.
I've been there. I've been there. Well, sorry for that delay, and thank you for having me today. So I think we're now transitioning to the portion of the workshop where we get to talk a little bit more about solutions, about action. The research is super, super important, and I participated in the Minderoo report, and it was really actually what got me moving. So it's good to see lines drawn from A to B. Let me figure out how to share screen on this. Yeah, that looks right. Oh no, wait, nope, okay. System settings, Google Chrome wants to do a thing. Fine, great, Google, okay, it's not letting me just click through. Apologies here. Okay, fine, open system settings and do your thing. Or not. Hello? All right, I'm having a little technical difficulty.
One of those mornings.
Grant access to this application in privacy and security settings. All right, let's try that. I was just there. I'm sorry, it doesn't like being recorded.
No,
it seems to be
okay.
An alternative would be for you to email your slides to us really quick. Hopefully that's not a large file. Or something's happening. There we go.
Did it work?
Excellent. Yes,
All
we just need the presenter view, but that yeah, you got it.
Yeah, all right. That looks great. Hooray.
Go, Megan. All right, off we go.
All right. So yeah, in terms of putting the non plastic rubber on the road, After working on the Minderu report and learning much of what you were just presented with, I got to thinking hard about, well, how are we going to make inroads on this issue? This is really significant. If you take a precautionary approach, we really already have the data that we need to start making changes, to know that changes are going to be necessary in our own exposures, in chemical policy, and so on. And that was a large part of what the Minderu report was even created to demonstrate. We understood that we needed to put it all in one place and see, show this is what's in the published literature. And then, that report was actually presented to the climate, that's not international climate talks, hello, to the negotiating treaty for the plastics negotiating treaty. So, okay, so what are we going to do? Well, on the one hand, we have a major asset at our backs in a good way, which is that basically everybody believes that this is a problem that needs solving. Polling data is really consistent, not only nationally, but internationally. If you talk to people about microplastics, but also plastics, they say 80% and up that they support reducing the amount of plastic that's produced, especially single-use plastics, which are about half of what we're looking at. 42% of all plastic under production is packaging. They support national policies that reduce those plastics and foam, and they support increasing the use of reusable packaging and foodware. And that's true in the United States. It's even more true overseas. This image here is one that I took while I was walking around in New York City on my way home from a plastics and health convention 2 years ago. So we have public opinion, and people are pretty loud about it. There are lots of citizen groups that have been pushing very hard to try to get legislative change, to try to change the regulatory standards and make it less likely that they will be involuntarily exposed to unnecessary plastics. These are mostly images taken from grassroots organizing, or I think this one in the lower corner was taken outside of the negotiating treaty. And then there are the scientists, and here we go with the Minderu report, who are pulling together the data, doing the research, pulling it together, and trying to place it in front of the lawmakers and the decision makers who kind of hold the fate of production and distribution in their hands. That's the Minderu team, and that gentleman there is Phil Landrigan. And then there's the Scientists Coalition for an Effective Plastics Treaty, which is similarly organized. It's physicians and mostly scientists talking to the decision makers about what we understand, what we're finding. But we're not getting very far. The treaty has stalled. I hear positive rumblings about negotiations getting moving again, but we know that industry was deeply involved in the room in the negotiations, and that they didn't get very far. On the left-hand side here, this is Albany in June 6, 2023. As New Yorkers were trying to pass the Packaging, Recycling, and Reduction Infrastructure Act, PREA, which would have placed a cap on single-use plastic production. It would have capped it at 70% of what it is now, and also required the removal of toxicants, 17 different ones, from plastics. So known toxicants, things that are already very well documented as purveyors of harm. And this image is interesting to me because it's hazy, because this was the day that the Canadian wildfires had been going long enough. The smoke had actually covered New York State, and the New York City schools were all closed because the smoke was so thick. I was in Albany that day waiting to see if they would bring this vote to the floor. It was the very last day of session. It was the last possible opportunity to do so. And actually, in that session, the Assembly heard no legislative they dealt with no environmental legislation at all, even with the specter of climate change directly in the room. So this is extremely frustrating. So what do we do? How do we solve this? How do we move the needle? Well, in comes an interesting piece of information that the public has seized on and is fascinated by for very good reason, and plenty of researchers are also, and that's the specter of microplastics. The race to research is on. Microplastics as a term was coined around, 2004, 2005. But by 2018, we're starting to look now in humans, not just the animal models, to see where are the microplastics. And of course, they're in poop. But basically everywhere we're looking, we're finding them, and it's just a steady march. Blood, that was interesting. I was at a symposium or conference when that finding came out. And inside the conference, we looked at each other and we all sort of had the same understanding at once, which is that if microplastics are circulating in the blood, wherefore the blood-brain barrier? Is it crossing the blood-brain barrier? We already knew that microplastics were crossing the placenta, and that was certainly worrisome because the placenta was seen as a inviolable barrier. Blood was beginning to move toward the next one, which was the blood-brain barrier, but let's see where else we go. Veins, testes, and semen. That was another barrier that we thought we would not see crossed, or at least hoped we would not see crossed, and that was crossed. Carotid plaque, the brain, May 2024. So that kind of broke the internet. It certainly was yet another indicator that we're in pretty deep with this. Olfactory bulb, bone, follicular fluid. This dominates the news headlines, but it's also had an interesting effect on the discussion in general, which prior to this had really been one about pollution, plastic pollution, largely as a marine debris issue, but now we're starting to look at terrestrial sources as well. And this is the movement from a pollution issue to a public health one, which meant that there were some new speakers in the room who were being listened to and being listened to with rapt attention. And that is researchers and physicians. Up on the left, we have Matt Campen, whose lab is the one that located microplastics in the brain. On the right, we have Leo Tresand, who's been really instrumental in coming up with recommendations and also economic estimates of attributable burden. So, you know, what proportion of prenatal births are due, for instance, to phthalates, and what does that cost the healthcare system and the economy in general? These people are being listened to and heard in ways that nobody, frankly, had been listened to and heard in this conversation before. And I found that very interesting. It also reminded me of something. I actually trained initially as a medical historian. And it reminded me of the germ theory of disease, which, you know, to us is irrefutable, but it was highly refutable. For hundreds of years, it was just a theory. It, you know, hadn't really been demonstrated. And then in the 1850s, this figure here, Ignaz Semmelweis, who's a obstetrician in Hungary, is noticing that the rate of childbed fever in women who are being attended by physicians in his hospital is very high. And it's much lower among women who are attended by midwives. And he reasons that, you know, these, I don't actually recall what term he used for germ. There were various terms over history, like animuncule and so on, but these particles were perhaps moving on the hands of physicians from the morgue or from surgery into the bodies of the women whose babies they were delivering. So he mandated hand washing in the hospital, and the mortality and morbidity rate among women who were attended by physicians went down enormously. Now, unfortunately, he wasn't very popular. This practice wasn't very popular because the physician staff resented the concept that they were the ones who were transferring disease. And, you know, the act of washing hands was onerous. So he wound up losing his job and he was involuntarily institutionalized and beaten to death. So it was an idea that was early for its time, but it wasn't going anywhere because in the same period, we have Lister and Pasteur also looking under the microscope. And then we have Robert Koch, who does something that no one had done prior to that, which is attach photography devices to his microscope. So he starts taking recognizable images of things like the tuberculosis bacillus. And this brings to literal light images of things that prior to this could only have been theorized, could only have been discussed. The germ theory goes from being a theory to being something that people can see and understand. And within about 30 years of Koch's work, hand washing and antiseptics were absolutely standard in medicine and really changed the way that the world thought about this causal mechanism, the germ. Well, under the microscope, frankly, nanoplastics look fairly similar. They look like pathogens to the lay person. And in asking, what do these pathogens or molecules or fibers or whatever you want to call them, what do they do? The answer winds up taking the listener down a tour of environmental health sciences, down a tour through what are the chemicals in plastic, what do we know that they do to tissue, how do they impact living beings, how do they impact cells, and so on. So seeing is believing here. The theory of change within PSNAP is as we can get medicine to recognize that microplastics, or rather all plastics, that plastic is a hazardous material. It is not inert. It's the chemicals within plastic migrate continually and they cause damage. As we get medicine to understand that, this will really change the nature of the conversation about plastics, plastic pollution, and also microplastics in general. So I started PSNAP a bit over a year ago. We started as 7 or 8 people. And between February and now, we've blossomed to 175 participants. It's about 60% physicians, 30% researchers, and then 10% environmental lawyers, policy people, nurses, public health professionals, and so on, all over the country. And the idea is to crowdsource what we know, what we understand, who we talk to, and how to change the messaging and understanding about plastics, microplastics, and human health. Being highly multidisciplinary at this point in a very nascent science is hugely useful because we get people from all different walks coming in with different problems, different ideas, different mechanisms for solving them, and different communication strategies. So at core, PSNAP is a science communication organization, but it's also bringing together people to consistently study what is now understood, the research that is being released just hand over fist, frankly, to stay on top of it, to talk to each other and to talk to the researchers about it. So to that end, we hold a roundtable every Friday. We've had a lot of people at this point, but basically we invite people who are participants in PSNAP or who we know are doing interesting work, anything cutting edge, to come and tell the group about it. The network is meant to be a resource. It's not obligatory. It's not meant to be an albatross. So people turn up when they can to the things that they're interested in. We've also started running working groups like this one, the Healthcare Plastics Working Group. About a fifth of the people who are involved in PSNAP are very concerned about plastics in healthcare. If healthcare were a country, it would be the 5th largest producer of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. And plastics are a big part of that. There are a lot of frivolous plastics in healthcare. Not all, of course. On this lower image, this is what you might have been facing if you had been going into, what would they have called it? The emergency closet at Mount Sinai had an emergency closet in the 1800s. Metal instruments that are not necessarily precise and antiseptic in the way that we might want them today. On the right-hand side, of course, we do have necessary plastics in healthcare, but a lot of what we're using is unnecessary or could be used or formulated differently. So that working group is addressing that. We also address other, I guess you could call them breakout issues based on the interest and the experience and expertise of the membership. So we have a working group that's staying up to date with what's going on in the world of chemical recycling. What are the health hazards and consequences to the people in the surrounding area? And what kinds of materials are produced by this and how safe are they? Also microfibers in health, a working group looking at that, specifically on what are the exposures, what can we say about exposure, about reducing exposure, and what are the particular harms that can come from microfibers as opposed to other microplastics. A synthetic turf working group, I think we've got the idea here. Oh, and the rapid response communication team. Now, this is as we pivot more into communications. We have a group inside of PSNAP that keeps an eye on the press, both academic and general, just newspapers and so on, and is ready at any point to speak to journalists, to respond to things, to put in our own op-eds, letters to the editor, and so on, to try to keep up with the cycle and keep it as informed as possible about what the science and the medicine are showing. To that end, we also develop handouts for patients and others, ones that are a little bit more, I guess, bedside friendly than a lot of the ones we've seen before. So rather than showing, say, a molecule of bisphenol A, cut straight to the point and say, these are the exposures, these are some of the possible outcomes, and here are the steps that you can take. So we're thinking in terms of what the patient would be hearing or what the regulator would be hearing and where people are coming into this conversation already. We also train speakers. We train physicians and researchers if they want the help to speak about the issue in ways that are compelling. A lot of that involves humor, frankly, tapping into these memes, getting people to be a little bit more relaxed in their communication because we understand that trusting the messenger is enormously important. Doctors and scientists, despite all that's gone on in our society in the last few years and post-COVID, are among the most trusted messengers of this kind of information, period, full stop. So we utilize that, but we also know that people trust more those who they feel they can relate to, those who are using humor, who are using accessible terms, and frankly, images and other kinds of things that are just friendly and reachable. As we train speakers and bring people into the network, we have our own speakers bureau, which is ready to go out. And I get lots of requests actually now from NGOs, from various groups, schools and so on, for speakers who can speak on plastics and health from a scientific perspective. And we're making an effort to make sure that we turn up specifically at medical conferences. We know that the plastic sessions are always packed, but this is a very important way of getting the information out among medical audiences. Go to the medical society meetings. Keep the medical societies talking about this. This is, in that germ theory kind of way, our effort of spreading the word inside of medicine itself, knowing also that as the societies change their positions on plastic as hazardous or not, they may be changing some of the questions that appear on board exams, and that will change the curriculum. And of course, we also meet with lawmakers, we offer testimony, we meet with decision makers everywhere we can. Anybody who asks the question or seems interested in scientific and medical information about this subject, we're happy to visit with in support of any kinds of policies that will reduce people's exposures to harmful toxicants. And we work in conjunction with other groups like Safer States and SHEA. Again, delivering grand rounds into hospitals and medical schools is an important part of what we do as well. So having physicians in the network who are already parts of hospital systems and already have that credibility is an important piece of what we're up to. So, oh, and lastly, teaching. I've been teaching a course on plastic, microplastic, and human health for some time, and I'm most recently offering it inside of Cooper Medical School of Rowan University. So aside from teaching the class, I'm also teaching other physicians and scientists to teach. Train the trainers. Anyway, those are some of the ways that we're working to get the word out. If you are a physician or a scientist, or you work in a nonprofit, or any of the things that fall under this umbrella where you want to be using your voice and moving along the scientific information, please feel free to reach out. We're large and growing, and every piece of the network reaches something new. So we're always interested. And let's see, how do I stop sharing? Did that work?
Yes, that was
right.
great. And then Megan wants people from Washington State to join the network. So please contact her after today. Does anybody have any questions for Megan? That was really interesting, the historical references as well, that a lot of us probably don't think about. Any questions from the audience? Any questions you want to put in chat? Oh, Anita Anita just joined your group. Go, Anita. Yeah. Jeff, you have a question.
Yeah, Megan, that was a absolutely fantastic talk. Really appreciate you illuminating your work. I did not realize you were an author on that report. And I really encourage people to read that report. It was so well done. I'm just going to go back to what I said earlier. I think we're picking low-hanging fruit right now, but we got to start picking high-hanging fruit. And which is why I kind of made the suggestion earlier of engaging some other industrial people to be in. This is going to be a political debate, really transform plastic use. And those companies have lots of money, lots of lobbyists. And if you don't engage some other folks that are kind of considered the new wave of discovering things, I think that's why I really encourage you to look at AI and get them involved if you can, because I think they're going to be looking for a niche. And what could be a more noble niche than helping our health and well-being of our children? So anyway, I just will read, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but I've been involved in the government for 45 years, and you have to pick your fights carefully with industry because they have enormous resources. So anyway, I just really want to applaud you. Please keep the good word going out, and I will be contacting you to learn more about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I have a question. I get to participate too. I was wondering how you train on uncertainty and also like pre-bunking and pre-inoculation.
Mm-hmm. I've been thinking a lot about that. It's a good question. At this point in our political cycle, there's a certain offensive, I think, going on right now to try to make this information less trusted. So one thing that I do in my lectures, and I've been encouraging others in PSNAP to do, is present the information. This is the science, this is what we know, this is how we know it and why we think it, and then also include a few slides that say, and this is what you will hear about why that, these are the doubts that you will hear, and here's how we answer those doubts. So put it directly in the lecture itself. Don't wait for people to leave the lecture and start talking and then hear from some other source, oh no, but the methods, it's they all look like lipids. You can't tell it's PET. No, we can actually, and here's why. So, I'm incorporating it into the lecture itself to put people on notice that, yeah, there's a lot of manufacturing of doubt. And sometimes I'll give a couple of examples of places where I see doubt being manufactured.
Thank you. I also, Jeff, you want to follow up?
Yeah, I would encourage y'all to use charismatic macrofauna.
Mm-hmm.
What really changed opinions on emerging contaminants was dolphins. They are the charismatic macrofauna in coastal areas. Pets are the charismatic macrofauna in lakes and streams. We found that with toxic algae. So look for your charismatic macrofauna that nobody will attack. Politicians will not attack charismatic macrofauna. It's politically unimportant to them. They will not be viewed favorably.
I would also add that certain parts of the body may attract more attention than others in terms of generating concern, especially around fertility. So
yeah, a movie just came out on Netflix called The Plastics Detox, in which it profiled Shauna Swan, who's she's a lot of things, but she's been studying reproductive health and endocrine disruption for much of her career. And, it gets right to the point about how endocrine disruption can really mess with, to use a scientific term, people's fertility and their capacity to carry a healthy fetus to term. So that is getting a lot of traction, actually. Someone in the chat asked for examples of doubt that's being manufactured. And one that I've noticed, especially in the last 2 or 3 months, is a false distinction in this question of where is the harm coming from? Is it coming from the particles or is it coming from the chemicals that are in the particles? We only know a little bit about the particles themselves because they're very hard to image. They're so tiny. Once you get down to nanoplastics, it's very difficult to see what exactly a particle is doing. We do know that wherever they appear, we're seeing reactive oxidative stress, we're seeing inflammation, we're seeing impacts, but is that about the shape of the particle? Like what's causing it? What we do know, though, without doubt, is that the chemicals that are involved in plastic, and there are 16,325 cataloged ones at last count, but a great many of them are hazardous, meaning they're toxicants, they're neurotoxicants, they're carcinogens, and they're endocrine disruptors. And we have decades of data on what they do. We know that as those particles get into the body, they act like Trojan horses. So they're simply, releasing the chemicals that are part of the particles. You cannot really separate the chemical effects from particle effects enough to say, oh, well, it's one and not the other. They are together. But what I am seeing is people increasingly insisting that because we don't fully understand the particle effects, we can say nothing about the chemical effects. They're manufacturing a kind of doubt where doubt on one side of the ledger obscures then certainty on the other side of the ledger. On the chemical side of the ledger, we're pretty much where we were with cigarettes and cancer in the 1950s. It's very well documented. Changing policy is another row to hoe, but there's the introduction of that particular doubt. I've received the same question at every conference I've been to now in the last 4 weeks, and I've heard it since January. So that question came from somewhere, it's being pushed, and it's meant to obscure what we know.
Okay, Jeff, one more comment, and then unfortunately we have to
standard
move on,
industry
Marta.
practice,
You'll get a lot of
shift the blame, create confusion,
Right.
and continue to produce products. And they did the same thing. For example, Syngenta created a panel that extended the use of atrazine for over 25 years. I was invited to the first panel meeting, and I was not invited after that. But I will only tell you, their strategy when they charged us with was, if there is not a clear indication, we need to create what they call the need for more research. But that's just confusion, is what that really is a mask for. So recognize what it is. And, I think you're going to see more of that. We have just concluded a manuscript on risk assessment of microplastics per se. They are not that toxic, but it's the co-additives that go with them that you cannot disassociate. And that'll be kind of our thesis at the end of that manuscript if it's published. So I really applaud you for picking up on that trend, because that is probably going to be the operating principle for a while.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Megan. Lyda had an interesting comment in the chat as well. We'll follow up, and I'm sure you two will have a lot to talk about as well.
Excellent.
Yeah. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, we are going to move on to Marty Young from Clean Water Action, who will be doing workout here in our Olympic National Park. So that'll be an interesting dovetail as well. Welcome, Marta.
Thank you very much. Let me try to figure out how to share.
All right, we're almost there. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you very much. Yeah, so thank you very much. It's been an honor to be here with you all, and I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about our Rethink Disposable program that helps us stop this abundance of plastic that we've just been hearing so much about, and also a campaign that Washington has passed, that California has passed, and New Jersey just passed, the strongest of its kind, called Skip the Stuff. See if I can advance my slides. There we go. So Rethink Disposable is a national program that partners with a number of different organizations. And I'm going to talk a little bit, just briefly, about some of the partnerships that we've had with emergency food providers in New Jersey, because it will highlight some of the work that we're doing in the national parks. The work that you'll hear about on the national parks is wrapping up. We don't have case studies yet, and we don't have solid numbers, but some of the partnerships that we've had with the emergency food providers is going to kind of exemplify some of the numbers that are coming from switching from single use to reusables. Just in a couple years of kind of working with Meals on Wheels programs, senior centers, and soup kitchens has helped these organizations save over $300,000 by eliminating the constant purchase and disposal of plastic single-use items, and having them switch to reusables. This is one of my favorite case studies that we partnered with a Meals on Wheels program that serves 1,500 meals a week. And by making the simple change of having a fresher option for the seniors, they previously have been given that 3-ounce, 4-ounce Dole fruit cup full of sugary fruit, plastic, capped with plastic. And if you do a deep dive, oftentimes the sealant is a PFAS, and it's just leaching just toxics into that sugary item. But people are now having fresh fruit. And I just point this out because it's just a simple way of eliminating our constant being surrounded by plastic. Partnered with this other organization that serves Meals on Wheels, that serves seniors through 6 senior centers. And by switching out, giving people more dignity by serving their hot meals, their weekly, daily would be served a hot meal on disposable plastic, forks and knives and spoons that would break and have people would have trouble cutting into their meals. We switched them over to reusables, and the people were thrilled, but the organization also saved money, because one of the hangups sometimes people say is, oh, well, we need to have the plastic in our life because it is so much more financially, it's a more financial choice than having reusables or having a higher quality item. And these case studies are proof in the pudding that that is not true. Our partnerships with the national parks is incredibly exciting, and I'm going to go into them a little bit here in a second, but we're partnering with 3 different national parks, and they're radically different, which would be great because they're the models that can come from each of those can be then replicated to other national parks or just other facilities in general. But it's Petrified Forest in Arizona, Jamaica Bay in Queens, New York, and Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. And Jamaica Bay is basically 2 beach clubs in the Gateway National Recreation Area. And we've, it's basically the clubs have seasonal visitors. It's a seasonal site. It's a bird sanctuary, but people had been bringing in cases of water because they didn't have access to fresh water. We have now almost completed the installation of 9 refill water stations. People will not be able to purchase plastic disposables at their cafes, and they have a tiki bar, but instead we have specially logoed stainless steel water bottles that people can purchase if they did not bring their own. We've switched out all of their single-use foodwares for reusables, and doing a neat educational campaign around plastics and the importance of reduction. They run summer camps for children throughout the season, and part of the program has always been for those students to pick up trash along the beaches, because the beaches are littered with all of these water bottles that get and plastic in general that's filled with in the garbage cans, and the wind blows and it ends up in the oceans. It's adding a lot of time and energy for the staff to be picking up, but we're doing an education campaign to help the children understand the importance of plastic reduction. Petrified Forest, for those people who have never been, I highly recommend it. It's in Arizona on Navajo and Apache land. It's right on Interstate 40. It's 28 miles from north to south. There's a main dining area in the north by the north entrance, and about a third of the way down, there's a historic ice cream parlor. We've switched out all of their single-use foodware for reusables, including salt and pepper and ketchup and condiment. They now have dispensers for people to use instead. And what's exciting is just last week we were having a meeting with the site manager, and they've already seen preliminary data. They've already seen a 2/3 waste reduction, which is just incredible in terms of the whole life cycle of plastic reduction. We've added a dishwasher, compost collection, compost machine, and also education around plastic reduction. Mammoth Cave is the largest currently of the 3 national parks we're working in. They have 4 different places to dine, including a camp store and a Starbucks. They have completely eliminated their single-use plastic also at this site, which is incredibly exciting, because both for their dine-in and when people, this is more of a closed loop for those people who have never been to Mammoth Cave. It's more of a closed loop environment. People tend to go there as a destination. So if people do want, if they are eating there, they might eat their food in-house, but they also might go to the picnic tables and go outside. And they used to always have single-use disposable foodware, but we've included bare bins that are outside to collect reusables as well as waste collection. We have keepsake stainless steel water bottles for people to use at the 2 water refill stations that we've installed. One is at the cafe, but another one is at the camp store outside, because the folk who would always camp never had access to fresh drinking water. So they were kind of forced to bring in their own bottled water. But now they have a free access to good refillable water. And you'll see in the picture in the top right, the Mammoth Cave National Park image, that is now going to be the it's the new design on the reusable mugs at the Starbucks. For people who want to purchase these mugs, they can keep them, but there will also be just a more simple design that people can return their reusable mugs. But, we're doing, this site is also exciting because they have it's a very holistic compost system. They're collecting the compost. They have a partnership with a local farm that takes said compost and in turn provides them with their meat and their produce. Again, education is significant around the plastic reduction, and we're doing even some activities for children, including on their, they have a dine-in restaurant, and the kids now will have their placemat will be a crossword puzzle with reusable sustainable education component within. Switching gears, but very similar, is a campaign called Skip the Stuff. Those people who are not aware, it's the campaign that businesses only provide single-use cutlery and condiments upon request. New Jersey just passed the strongest law in the country. It goes into effect August 1st. So right now we're in a huge educational mode because we wove in 180 days of education, because education around why we should be reducing plastic and the successes around it is critical. Washington State led this way with the passage of the very first Skip the Stuff. Went into effect in 2022, but it passed in May. And California and Washington both went in effect at the same time. But it's critical to understand that as laws get passed, it's important to learn from them, and hopefully, these other states are now working on Skip the Stuff, and the goal is to make each state, the next state that passes it, a little bit stronger. New Jersey, we had an old legislative language that while I was working to fix the loopholes within that language, to make sure that it wasn't about biodegradable and compostable products, because the more you dig on those, they're compostable, biodegradable bioplastics are often full of more toxic microplastics and PFASs and toxic exposure. That while trying to fix the language in the state, we went town by town and ultimately got 65 local policies, including, if you're familiar with New Jersey, Jersey City and Hoboken, 2 of the largest cities, successfully passed, and that kind of helped the trajectory of other towns and cities passing. I did a case study for the town of Red Bank when they passed back in 2024, and went restaurant to restaurant to see how successful their Skip the Stuff local ordinance had been. And it was exciting because it shows a 94% reduction in what businesses were providing, which equated to a lot of money saved for these businesses. So they were no longer needing to give out all those handfuls of ketchup packets and soy sauces and plastic cutlery that more often than not people would take home to their homes or their offices, and like me, would have a junk drawer full of all these unwanted items, or it would be thrown directly into the waste stream unused. I throw this in case you want to go more in depth and you can't sleep at night. There's a lot of links within this. But the, Skip the Stuff is a wonderful example of, a triple win of how we can go back to the way we used to live without the abundance of plastic surrounding us. It's a huge financial burden to businesses to be purchasing items that people don't want. The studies show that 40 billion single-use plastic cutlery alone is thrown away in the US. And most of that is never even used. And that number equates, for the unused portion to about $200 million of expenses for small businesses to be, again, buying things that aren't wanted and needed at all. And there's municipality costs with waste hauling and litter collection. Studies show that 70% of street litter is from food and beverage containers that can clog storm drains. And even if plastic could be recycled, which it cannot, it slips right through recycling facilities. It jams the machinery. But as probably many of us on this call know, less than 6% of plastic in the US is being recycled because, as Megan just said, plastic is very, very complex with over 16,000 different chemicals that make it up, and 4,200 of those are actually known to be toxic to our health. But we can make a difference, and Skip the Stuff is one policy change that is a good example of how we can reduce plastic, and we can stop the trajectory that's showing that there's going to be more plastic than fish in the oceans by 2050 if we don't change. I'm not going to go through this because we've already heard several hours of wonderful presentations of how the life cycle of plastic is toxic and it's harming us. And again, we can make a difference. And as it should come as no surprise that ExxonMobil is the largest producer of these nurdles, of the building blocks of plastic. And each of us can make a difference, and each of us can put pressure on local governments and on the state to reduce plastic. And I will end with this map of New Jersey. I created this New Jersey plastic policy map that highlights just some of the plastic policies that we have passed in New Jersey. And there's links upon links upon links in here. Again, if you can't sleep at night, you can sift through all these links. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Marta. That was great. Go Jersey. All right. Does anybody have questions?
Washington led the way, so go Washington.
Yes, us too. I'm just thinking that New Jersey gets maligned unnecessarily.
Thank you.
I grew up close to Marta, so whenever I meet people from New Jersey, I get very excited. Any questions for Marta? Want to come offline or ask a question in the chat? Mike asked, what is Starbucks using at Mammoth Cave for iced beverages?
Very good question. We are using the reusable stainless steel at the moment. Again, we don't have a case study because as some of these challenges are going to be coming up, we're going to be tweaking some of our suggestions and ensuring that the right thing works. But they're going to be getting rid of all of their plastic. At the moment, it's the mugs and the stainless steel is what Starbucks is going to be using.
Great. All right. Transformation of the company in multiple ways. Jeff, you have a question.
No, I'm sorry. I was trying to just, I apologize. Just want to say, great presentation.
Okay.
I was trying to find a thumbs up. Sorry.
Okay. And then Patrick says that we have a statewide toolkit for single-use serviceware law. What are the pros and cons of using Stop the Stuff as opposed to a statewide toolkit?
this, I think I understand your question, so please jump in if I don't answer it correctly.
Yeah.
But the local policies have been successful. The state policy is better because it becomes more universal and there's more education around it, so that there's no question about what town you're in, so you don't have to worry about it. And I will say that I don't live in Washington, but I understand that there's been a little bit of issues in California and Washington with the implementation of their skip the stuff. So it might be more town by town. But if you look at the dates of when those two states passed, it was right at COVID. And so everything went into haywire.
Oh, yeah.
And so some of the education that had been planned around the implementation, didn't happen. So hopefully hopefully the word is going to continue. And I know that in California, people are working kind of going back through the motions of not passing it because it's already passed, but kind of going back through the education aspect. And I think Washington is doing some of the same.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Marta. Unfortunately, we have to move on, but that was great. Thank you again. Very interesting. Everybody check out the chat for comments and links. And next, we're going local with Taylor Lawson from the Island County Public Health District, who's doing some great stuff. Welcome, Taylor.
Hello, thank you for having me today. It has been very interesting and eye-opening, and I've been taking notes to actually integrate a lot of this into what I'm sharing today with everyone. So yes, taking it very local. Taylor Lawson, Deputy Director at Island County Public Health, and we are located on, the home base is on Whidbey Island, if you're familiar with the area, but our county is Whidbey Island and Camino Island. So 2 islands, sole source aquifers, lots of shoreline, as you can imagine. And so this is top of mind for a lot of us here in public health, as well as our local community partners. I'm going to share my screen here. And there we go. Does this work okay for everyone? Did it follow through?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. I can't see anybody anymore, so just flying blind. Great, so I am here today to share some preliminary work that we're doing in terms of trying to kind of bring together resources within Island County, and that includes a lot of health resources and tangentially or even just directly around microplastics as like a health education tool of sorts. So we are embarking on this journey to create a Thrive resource guide for Island County. It's a coordinated health directory that has been spearheaded by our health director, Sean Morris. And so I will do my best to present on this project, but I've included his contact information as well at the end of the presentation if anybody has any questions or would like to reach out to him. So in Island County, the challenge for us in a lot of ways is our residents are facing a disjointed system for accessing care and services. There's a lot of just patchworks of different directories or resource guides that folks rely on depending on their either geographic location or within the sector in which they're trying to receive support or maybe they work. We also have a lot of geographic isolation, so the fragmentation is amplified when we look at our geography. A lot of folks who, let's say, live on the south end of Whidbey Island must travel across the ferry to the next side, to the mainland, to receive a lot of services versus driving an hour north to our larger city in North Whidbey, Oak Harbor. There's also Camino Island. It's a whole another island that's we have to cross through 2 different counties to get back into Island County on Whidbey Island. So you can imagine that folks are often looking elsewhere for resources and support. And then in Island County specifically, we have a very unique demographic. Our county is one of the oldest in Washington State, with nearly 28% of our residents being 65 or older. And as you can imagine, that comes with another layer of challenges in accessing resources, whether that's transportation, receiving or accessing specialty care, which is very limited in Island County, and even something as more local, such as food access, can be challenging for folks who are aging on Whidbey Island and Camino Island. So where did this come from? This all of this information, as well as this concept of Thrive, came from our 2024 Community Health Assessment. This assessment was very comprehensive in our reach, and folks by and large would say things to the extent of, we have a lot of resources here and to help support me in my health and well-being across the lifespan. But really, sometimes it's really hard to navigate those resources. It's also difficult to locate them. And then it also kind of feels disjointed sometimes, like, almost like the partners maybe not are communicating with one another, or not aware of each other's existence in some cases. So we also saw that there was an increased need for senior supports, behavioral health, and healthcare in Island County, which is pretty common, as we've seen across counties who complete our health assessments. So the solution we've developed is Thrive Island County. We're working on this right now. It's hopefully be launched here at the end of June, but it'll be a single, easy to use digital front door of sorts for folks to be able to access resources across not just what you would think of as traditional healthcare, but also providing opportunities for almost like a journey through kind of exploration of things within their health and well-being through the vital conditions of health. So spanning upon not just your physical health, but your mental well-being, the social determinants of health that impact your life, and for relevance here, really the environmental impacts as well that may be impacting your health and well-being. And so the kind of exploration of that will come in the form of not just resources that are available for folks, but literature and even our community groups that are working in all these different spaces, being able to share information with folks to provide access to that, and for folks to really get to know what's going on in their life. We also are really looking at our scattered guides. Even internally, we noticed that there are a few that needed to be integrated into one, essentially, and make it mobile friendly so folks can access it very easily. Thrive is also that health promotional tool, as I mentioned, so designed to empower residents with the knowledge and connections they need to live healthier lives. And then, let's see, we've been working with community partners on this. So for relevancy here as well, we've been working with a lot of our environmental groups who are really focused on not just the water quality, or in a lot of cases, we're looking at septic and wastewater treatment as well as a high priority in our county, but also looking at resources across the lifespan. So we have a lot of organizational groups who work with children all the way through seniors who live in our community. So we've really been honing in on how we can collaborate with folks to create something that not only will our residents use, but also our partners. And as I mentioned, we really look at the vital conditions for health, so not just looking at healthcare as a kind of a core of that, but really things like housing, food security, and then the environmental and behavioral health impacts that we see in Island County specifically. Our theory of change here, Thrive focuses on improving access and visibility to the services that already exist. And our statement is, if we make existing services easier to find and provide residents with preventative health knowledge, then we will improve health coordination, health literacy, and overall community well-being. So this is a little snapshot of what it will look like at the homepage. As I mentioned, we're still working on it. We're actually going out into community with kind of doing some beta testing for folks to really start to explore and see how folks naturally navigate resource guides, and also seeing where we might be having some gaps in services and resources available for folks. So you may be wondering, how is this connected to today's workshop? In recent years, Island County, and actually a lot that comes through for public health and our natural resources department, we get a lot of calls, we get a lot of feedback from folks, not just residents, but community partners, asking how public health is addressing, oh, there's a typo in there, I'm sorry, addressing microplastics and the impact on environmental and human health is what that should say. So folks from asking, how can I test my food, my water, looking at how we're kind of planning ahead for things such as wastewater treatment, and being mindful about how that's showing up in our environment and in our community, and the impacts that that has on our community members. So as of right now, we've been compiling a lot of resources from our community partners. And as I mentioned, I've been taking notes today as well for things that we could consider including as educational tools and resources for folks in our community to explore, and then also linking the community members to existing environmental groups or organizations that have a focus on this type of work, or opportunities for folks to participate and engage in things such as beach cleanup projects and volunteer opportunities like that. So really the big thing is that local community members will have access to the contact information, programmatic details around things that they might be interested in, and they'll be able to see a little bit more of the interconnections between how microplastics interact or show up in our water quality, our food safety, wastewater treatment. We have salmon and marine health we focus on here in public health. Surface water quality, childhood development is a big one too, and much more. And seeing those interconnections between not just health education, but also the community partners who work on those things. And then perhaps a little bit more importantly for us is also we will be able to track and review clicks and site visits. So that will be able to inform us on the connections and how we're reaching our community in different ways. And seeing the interests of folks, where folks are really having questions and maybe opportunities for us to really dive in on educational outreach and events where we can kind of address people's concerns if they're really looking into information that may not be available or have questions about what they are seeing. Here's a few more kind of screenshots, I suppose, in the workings of this. So really looking at environmental health as a core of our vital conditions for health and well-being. And we have filters that we've been working on trying to identify things that are really important for folks, including if you live in Northwood Beach, maybe being able to filter by where you live and seeing what's available in your general vicinity. And then, of course, we're including a lot of our partners. This list is not exhaustive by any means, but we do have quite a few groups within Island County Public Health that work on, in some way, shape, or form with water or plastics, and really hoping to support our local partners who are also working on beach cleanup, ways to reduce, reuse, recycle, and really thinking about how we interact with plastics in our environment, and then different ways that even landowners and property owners can get involved to really make a statement and to interact with this, and also community members and opportunities for education. And then this is also just a really quick example of what that exploratory page may look like. We're still building this out, but if folks may not know what they're looking for in terms of resources or community partners that they want to connect with, there's an opportunity for them to simply do more of a guided search into kind of the literature and learning more about different topics that impact their health and well-being. So that was very short and sweet, but yeah, this is where we're at. We're hoping to get things launched here in the next few months, and it'll be an iterative process. We imagine there'll be a lot of feedback from folks as they start to really recognize how this could be useful for them, but that is where we're at, and we're really excited about it, especially this holistic approach to health and really helping people and guiding people towards information that they may not have been aware of, or really seeing the interconnections between all of human health and environmental health as well.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Taylor. Does anyone have questions for Taylor? There's also a lot of how do you get big groups of people who are working in the same domain to identify duplicative, overlapping, just sort of that whole integration issue must have been challenging.
Yeah, I was interested in that because that is one of the things, at least, that brought me into public health, was kind of the disjointed ways in which we provide support and services for folks. Sometimes that's it's unavoidable. But actually, most of our partners have come together, and I've seen some organically forming groups and coalitions kind of blooming from this work, where people are like, wow, I had no idea. We should do this more often, kind of thought process. So
That's
I think,
nice. Yeah.
yeah, by and large, folks are really looking for opportunities to collaborate.
Well, one thing that I've noticed from spending a lot of time in Island County is that there is a very, very strong place attachment. People really care about the community, and that is very visible in many different ways. And so I'm going to guess that that probably helps because you already have that connective tissue.
Absolutely. Yes, there's so many groups who, and folks are really curious on how to get engaged is the big thing too. It's like, and it tangentially really supports your health and well-being just to be involved, right, in community. And so I feel like there's such a great bridge that we can kind of create between different elements of health that people may never have thought about before, just even social interactions, and also protecting the environment and how that impacts somebody's health and well-being is pretty powerful.
I'm looking at the context, so that it fits together, kind of like a constellation. It also, it makes sense all of a sudden.
Yeah. Well, trying to help take the overwhelm in some ways out of it too. It's like, wow, this is a big issue. How can I possibly make an impact? And it's like, let's start here, and showing folks where they can go to support. So.
Yes, organization leads to feelings of safety.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you. If you have any questions for Taylor, please put them in the chat. Thank you, Taylor. And now we're going to move on to Mike Schad. Am I pronouncing your last name correctly, Mike? Is it Shade?
Yes, Shade is in window shade. Yes.
It's Shade. Okay, so not Schad. Okay. Sorry about that. Welcome from Toxic Free Future, another local speaker.
Great. Can you guys hear me and see my screen okay?
Yeah, we're good. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to participate here today. Really excited to be here. I'm going to be talking about the work that we've been doing here both in Washington State and also at the national level to drive down demand for toxic chemicals and plastics out of consumer products and packaging, which of course can be notable sources of exposure to microplastics in our environment. So for those of you that may not be familiar, TFF is a Seattle-based national environmental health research and advocacy organization. This is our 45th anniversary. We do a lot of work in Washington State to safeguard families and communities from harmful chemicals and plastics. We also advocate for policy reform at the federal level. We engage businesses, which I'll be talking about, and we also conduct original scientific research into chemicals and plastics of high concern. So one thing that I just want to start out is to note that in our work to advance corporate and governmental policies, we focus our efforts to advance policies to address both plastics of high concern as well as chemicals of high concern. So when we talk about chemicals of high concern, we are referring to chemicals that are carcinogens, mutagens, reproductive toxicants, chemicals that persist or build up in people or in the environment, also referred to as PBTs, or chemicals of equivalent concern like endocrine or hormone disrupting chemicals, which scientists, as we've heard, can be dangerous even at low levels of exposure, or chemicals that can break down into one of the above. As we think about plastics of high concern, in addition to thinking about their material toxicity impacts, as we've talked about in terms of their size, length, etc., we're also very concerned about plastics that are sourced from petrochemicals that meet these criteria. For example, monomers that are CMRs or PBTs, chemical additives like phthalate plasticizers that are hormone disruptors or toxic byproducts like dioxins and furans that can be released when certain plastics are manufactured and disposed of. And this hazard-based approach, particularly addressing chemicals of high concern, is aligned with policy frameworks, not only here in Washington State, but all across the world in the Safer Products for Washington program, as well as other Washington laws. The European Union REACH legislation has a similar definition for substances of very high concern. This approach is also embedded in voluntary initiatives like the EPA Safer Choice criteria, as well as best-in-class approaches to chemical hazard assessment, such as Green Screen and Chem Forward. So as we work to protect communities and families from chemicals and plastics, we tend to focus our efforts on addressing those that pose the most serious hazards to public health and the environment. We've also developed a policy framework to guide our work, not only in Washington State and other governments, but also in corporate America, a framework that we call the essential elements for a healthier future, which include the 5 concepts of corporate and government responsibility, transparency, ban the bad, safer solutions, and accountability. And I want to talk about this a little bit in the context of the Safer Products for Washington program, which is a program that was created by a statewide law that we advocated for, which is really the strongest law in the country addressing both chemicals of high concern and plastics of high concern. And I share this because we think that the Safer Products for Washington program can be an effective policy tool to reduce not only microplastics, but chemicals of concern that are exposing people and fish and wildlife in places like Puget Sound to harmful substances like PFAS. So for those of you that are not familiar with Safer Products for Washington, this is a program that gives Washington State the authority to ban or regulate chemicals of high concern and to identify safer alternatives that businesses can transition to. One of the things that makes this program unique is that it gives the state the authority to call in information to require reporting from companies on where chemicals of concern may potentially be utilized in consumer products or packaging, and then also not only to identify problematic ingredients or plastics, but also to require companies to disclose information on safer alternatives to chemicals or plastics of high concern. And that information could be really powerful in identifying both problems and solutions to chemicals and plastics. Also, perhaps most notably, when the state is able to identify safer alternatives to chemicals or plastics of concern, that gives ecology the authority to ban or restrict chemicals or even entire chemical classes of concern, such as phthalates or PFAS or organohalogen flame retardants in products and packaging, including plastics that can release these chemicals or chemical classes of concern. I'm going to put a link in the chat right now to some background on the Safer Products for Washington program, particularly information about the chemicals and chemical classes that the state has been enacting restrictions on in recent years. And one of the things that is really notable about this is not only protecting people in Washington State, but that is also driving market transformation at an international or national and international level as well. One of the things that I think is notable about the program also is that as the State Department of Ecology is evaluating whether or not to potentially regulate or restrict chemicals or plastics, the state needs to identify whether or not there are safer, feasible, and available solutions. They can only restrict or ban a chemical or plastic if they can identify that there are safer, feasible, and available solutions for the chemicals of concern and the product categories that they're looking at. And that's notable because that information can be really valuable to governmental policymakers, not only here in Washington State, but governments across the country, across the world, and also businesses, so that when companies are reformulating products, say they're getting X chemical or Y plastic out, they can use the information that ecology develops to identify safer, feasible, and available alternatives that can ensure that we're not moving from one bad actor chemical or plastic to another. Also, notably, when the state acts, the state also has identified either bans or reporting requirements that include enforcement provisions, so the program is actually being implemented. If you look at the link in the chat, you'll see, as I noted, examples of the chemicals or chemical classes that the state has so far advanced regulations on in recent years. Additionally, there are a handful of other chemicals or plastics that the state is in the process of evaluating whether or not to potentially regulate. I'll talk about one in just a second that we're concerned about, which is directly related to microplastics, which is PVC and PVDC plastic. Unfortunately, the state has proposed delaying action on these two plastics, which we're concerned about, and we think that this could be a low-hanging fruit opportunity to advance protections on microplastics in Washington state. But across the board, I will say that to date, the Safer Products for Washington program has been very effective in advancing protective regulatory policies to address numerous chemicals and chemical classes of high concern that pose significant hazards and risks to water bodies like Puget Sound, people, fish, and wildlife. So one of the questions I was asked about is, well, what are the needs and opportunities and gaps in Washington state? Well, one opportunity is stakeholders really should consider engaging in the Safer Products for Washington public comment processes on an annual basis. There's typically multiple opportunities for stakeholders to provide input or feedback into ecology to help identify, for example, where are chemicals of concern potentially found, where ecology might want to consider acting on, where are there safer alternatives that are already existing that we can potentially learn from. I think we heard some interesting examples today. For example, the work on Skip the Stuff that we just heard about from Marta. I think another need and opportunity in Washington state is we really desperately need more funding to scale and expand the Safer Products for Washington program. We have been advocating for more funding for the program year over year. We think there's a tremendous opportunity to continue to expand and scale this program, especially given that it's been arguably the most effective chemical policy program in the country. And we think that more funding will not only help to advance more restrictions on chemicals and plastics of high concern, but also help to transition to safer chemicals and reusables that can help really solve the types of challenges that we're speaking with today. As I noted, I think that there are a couple of low-hanging fruit opportunities that we have right in front of us in Washington state to address microplastics that are showing up in places like Puget Sound. As I mentioned, the state of Washington recently identified organochlorine and organobromine substances as substances of concern for potential regulation. And the state has begun by beginning to evaluate whether or not there are safer, feasible alternatives to polyvinyl chloride and PVDC plastics in packaging. While we were very pleased that these two plastics were identified for potential action, unfortunately, Ecology recently announced that they were proposing to delay action on evaluating alternatives to these two plastics. Now, that's not to say that it's not slam dunk to identify alternatives, but we're very concerned about delaying action on these two plastics, which will delay action by 5 or more years at this juncture. So we really hope that Ecology will reconsider and continue to make progress on evaluating safer alternatives to PVC and PVDC in packaging. We know that there are many alternatives that are out there already, like glass and reusables, and we think that there are opportunities for Washington state to advance restrictions on these two plastics of high concern in order to protect public health and the environment and to reduce exposure to microplastics in Washington state. So I talked a little bit about the government kind of side of the equation, I also want to talk now about some of the work that we've been doing to engage the business community. Over 10 years ago, we launched a national program called Mind the Store, which is a program that we set up to engage businesses in Washington State and across the country to drive market transformation away from chemicals and plastics of high concern. And there's several reasons why we decided to launch this program. One of the key ones is we know that, unfortunately, federal policy change can be very slow, and oftentimes businesses, particularly retailers, can actually act much more quickly than government can, particularly at the federal level. And increasingly, consumers are demanding that brands and retailers take action on chemicals and plastics of high concern. So we launched the Mind the Store program back in 2013 to challenge major retailers to leverage their market power and influence to drive harmful chemicals and plastics out of consumer products and packaging, not only to safeguard we as consumers, but also to safeguard communities and workers in the environment across the life cycle of chemical production, use, and disposal. And we've seen over the years how this program has really been impactful in driving major retailers to reduce and eliminate harmful chemicals and plastics. You see on the right there a story from the New York Times from 2015 when we engaged the world's largest home improvement chain, the Home Depot, to adopt a policy to phase endocrine disrupting phthalates out of vinyl flooring, which at the time was one of the biggest uses of orthophthalates in the world. Vinyl flooring historically contained between 30 to 50% of phthalates by weight. Home Depot announced it would phase phthalates out of flooring within a year, and following the Home Depot's action, several other competing retailers, including Lumber Liquidators and Lowe's, Menards, joined them, all of which joined Home Depot in phasing phthalates out of flooring, and within a year, we were able to completely transform a chemical product sector. And we're proud that about 10 years later, under the Safer Products for Washington program, Ecology recently enacted restrictions on phthalates in vinyl flooring. And I share that because that's both an example of how businesses can sometimes move more quickly than government, but also how corporate actions by retailers, in this case Home Depot and phthalates in flooring, can also show government policymakers that that change is possible. And so these are some of the reasons why we launched Mind the Store, to engage retailers to address chemicals and plastics of concern. One of the ways in which we've engaged retailers over the years has been to put out a report card on a regular basis, grading retailers and how they're addressing chemicals and plastics of high concern. The criteria that we use for the retailer report card is aligned with the chemical policy framework that I shared before, the essential elements for a healthier future, which includes corporate and government responsibility, transparency, ban the bad, safer solutions, and accountability. So the same governmental policy framework that we're advancing in states like Washington is the same framework that we're evaluating and benchmarking retailers against. And we found over the years that by publicly grading companies, this can really help to encourage companies to improve. No company wants to earn a poor letter grade of a D or an F. And so by publicly grading retailers, by highlighting the leaders, by calling out the laggards, this has really helped to catalyze and drive a competitive race to the top in the retail sector. You'll see on the right a headline from Bloomberg News from the first report card we put out in 2016. Walmart is first, Amazon is worst in new ranking on chemicals. And by kind of playing companies off of one another, it really helps to drive improvement. And this information that we put out about which retailers are leading, which retailers are lagging, that type of ESG analysis is really valuable information, not only for consumers who want to support responsible businesses, but that information is also invaluable for investors, because many of these companies we look at are publicly traded, as well as policymakers and regulators in states like Washington and other states across the country. Just to provide an example of how the report card has driven change over the years, within 1 year, of the first scorecard that we put out in 2016, 7 out of 11 of the retailers either announced new or expanded their safer chemical policies to address chemicals or plastics of high concern. And here is a snapshot of the 7 retailers that took action within 1 year of the first scorecard that came out. The report card is available on our website at retailerreportcard.com. I will actually pull up the link and put it in the chat. And if you go there, you can actually easily click through and see how different companies compare and contrast with one another across about a dozen or so key product sectors where we know chemicals and plastics are commonly utilized. The first year we put out the scorecard in 2016, we evaluated 11 major retailers. This year we're evaluating 50 of the largest retailers in North America who have trillions of dollars in annual revenue. And we believe that this market power that they have really can be transformative in driving chemicals and plastics of high concern, including microplastics out of products. So this year, for example, if you look at the companies in the green boxes, those are the 4 new retailers that we're evaluating for the first time ever: Bath & Body Works, The Gap, Lululemon, Williams-Sonoma, and Wayfair. Running out of time, but I wanted to note a couple of findings from our recent analysis, and particularly thinking about plastics. Because we've been tracking companies now for 10 years, we can actually see where, some trends. So if we take a look at the most recent report card, we found that across the board, 44% of retailers we evaluated had set goals to reduce or eliminate chemicals and plastics of high concern. 30% of retailers we evaluated had goals on PFAS. And if we look at plastics, 20% of retailers had set goals to reduce or eliminate PVC plastic, and 12% of retailers had set goals to reduce or eliminate expanded polystyrene or polystyrene plastics. And I share that to note that we know that there are businesses that are actually working to reduce or eliminate plastics like PVC and polystyrene that are turning up as microplastics and contaminating our environment. Companies are not only setting goals, but companies are also reporting progress in implementing their programs. We also found that 30% of companies evaluated had reported progress in reducing or eliminating PFAS in their in products like food packaging and textiles. For example, McDonald's has achieved their national elimination of PFAS in food packaging. 20% of retailers have reported progress on EPS and polystyrene plastics, and 10% of retailers have made progress on PVC plastic and packaging. For example, recently the Home Depot disclosed that it has been successful in driving PVC plastic out of their own private brand packaging. So I share that to note that change is possible, and we are seeing some of the biggest retailers in North America make progress to tackle chemicals of high concern and also plastics like PVC and polystyrene that are turning into microplastics and contaminating our environment. And as I noted, we think that there are lower hanging fruit opportunities for Washington to take action on certain plastics like PVC and PVDC plastic, especially given the progress we're seeing in the business community. And the final things I want to note is, unfortunately, where we need more work, where we need more research, where we need more funding is around safer solutions. Only 20% of retailers that we evaluated have adopted criteria for safer alternatives that align with the definition of safer alternatives. The good news is, on the PFAS front, action on PFAS in food packaging really started in Washington State. Washington State was the first state in the country to ban PFAS in food packaging, one of the first in the world. Since then, 11 additional states have adopted legislation banning PFAS in food packaging. And through the efforts of our Mind the Store program, we've won commitments from more than 30 major retailers who have committed to eliminating PFAS in more than 150,000 stores in more than 100 countries across the world. So this shows that change is possible. We can make progress on these challenges, And there's real opportunities to kind of align the policy work that we're focusing on in states like Washington with policy work that we're doing to engage leading corporations. And with that, in closing, I want to note that the work that Safer Products for Washington is doing can be really invaluable to help businesses understand what are the priority chemicals and plastics that they should be focusing their efforts on for reduction and elimination. The work that Ecology is doing to identify alternatives can really be helpful for businesses and retailers to identify safer alternatives to priority chemicals and plastics. And at the same time, the work that retailers are doing can also be really helpful for policymakers in programs like Ecology to identify where are retailers making progress on priority chemicals and plastics, and where are there safer alternatives available to priority chemicals and plastics. And with that, I will close. And if you're interested in getting in touch, here's my contact information, and you can learn more on our website at toxicfreefuture.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, nothing like daylighting comparisons to kind of move things along. Deechla had a question, like a prove it question. Are these companies showing analytical test results that these chemicals actually are removed from their packaging? Like, how do you know? How do you verify?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, in many cases, that is largely through self-reporting that companies do through their ESG or sustainability reports. In the case of PFAS, for example, companies can utilize total fluorine testing to evaluate whether or not PFAS compounds are still present. It becomes a little more challenging when we deal with environmental contamination issues. Similarly, in the case of plastics, you can use tools like XRF devices to identify some plastics of high concern like PVC and PVDC. But also, I think this speaks to why we not only need voluntary corporate initiatives, but why we also need government policy action as well. So I think that's a good point. But I think part of the reason that we share this is because these are immense challenges that we're dealing with. We need not only solutions from government, but we also need solutions from the business community. And the good news is that there are companies that are out there, including some Washington-based businesses like Costco, for example, that are making real meaningful progress in some of these challenges that we're speaking to today. When we first started looking at Costco about 10 years ago, they had no chemical policy in place. They were not disclosing any progress on their work. They barely wouldn't even meet with us. And today, the company is actually disclosing meaningful progress addressing chemicals and plastics of high concern in their supply chain. And I share that to note that change is possible, and there are Washington-based businesses that are taking real and meaningful action.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I think Annalise has a question. Annalise, you want to come off mute and ask your question, and then Elise Granick after that.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. I'm curious, and I apologize if I missed this. I've been kind of ducking in and out for other meetings, but I'm curious if you've seen in the last few years a slowdown or even a reversal when it comes to actions these companies are taking. And if so,
Yeah.
I'm curious how you're keeping up the momentum with these companies, even if it's not on the federal agenda at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something we're concerned about. And, so far, we're actually in the process of scoring companies for the next iteration of the retail report card, which we'll be publishing later this year. And it's been a mixed bag. I don't have an official response, but we do see some companies that are continuing to disclose meaningful progress in reducing their chemical and plastics footprint. And then we are seeing some companies that are moving away from disclosing progress, which we're very much concerned about. So it's a mixed bag. And I would say, bookmark our website, sign up for our email list. We'll be publishing the next iteration of our retail report card later this year, and we'll have more information and more detailed analysis. It's a little just preliminary for me to go into the details, but I will say it's not all doom and gloom, but we are seeing some clouds out there, which is concerning, which is why we also need to redouble our efforts, both in the marketplace and also in state programs like the Safer Products for Washington program.
Great, thank you. Elise, you have a question?
Yes, first a huge shout out to Scott Coffin for helping me get around my
institution's restrictions with an incognito window.
Thank you, Scott.
And thank you for the presentation. I missed the very for beginning because I was having actually trouble getting in through the incognito window. But did you mention, Heidi often brings up the issue of like all the packaging when you go to the store, like what you guys are working with Walmart and Costco. Are there efforts to work with them around finding products with reduced packaging or working sort of back in the supply chain around that?
Absolutely.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the packaging, we're particularly focusing on the packaging of highest concern. So the plastics that are made from the most hazardous monomers like styrene and vinyl chloride, the packaging material that contains additives that can migrate or leach out that poses hazards to consumers like bisphenols and PFAS and flame retardants and heavy metals like lead. And we engage companies to encourage them to restrict those chemicals or plastics, to set goals to reduce or eliminate them, and then to publicly disclose progress in implementing those policy solutions. And we have seen several companies like McDonald's that have been disclosing progress, and then some companies that have slowed down a little bit. For example, several years ago, Walmart had set a goal to reduce their chemical footprint by 10% over a 5-year period. The good news is they doubled it. They reduced their chemical footprint by 20% over a 5-year period. However, the company has not yet set a new goal to further reduce their chemical footprint. So that's an example of a company that needs to do more to get back at setting public-facing quantifiable goals to reduce their chemical footprint. On the other hand, they have set goals to reduce and eliminate plastics of high concern like PVC, and they have been disclosing progress to that regard. So but yes, to answer your question, yes, we do work with companies to set, disclose, and report on progress to reduce chemicals and plastics in packaging. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Jeff, and then we're going to move on to discussion, so we have a little bit of free form time to chat.
Mike, that was an absolutely fantastic talk, and I really love your preventive approach to reduce plastics, and that is really public health based, and prevention is the way to go. And
yes,
I really like your tack of starting with small businesses, which are going to be looking at cost savings. I think you're going to find a receptive audience on that. And I like also your corporate strategy. One of the areas I would suggest y'all look at would be washing machine manufacturers, because as we've shown, the major source of discharge from wastewater treatment plants are textile microfibers. So if we can get it sounds like you're getting the industry, the textile industry, to reduce some of the things there, and then you can go to the washing machine manufacturers. I live in a town of about 10,000 people in a county with only 23,000 people, but Samsung is here and they produce 1 million washing machines a year.
Yeah,
there should be a great opportunity to start to go to some of these manufacturers to join a green alternative. Now, I know NOAA, I believe, funded a project in Oregon where they were actually going to go out and attach these traps on washing machines for the resort industry in Oregon. And they were actually going to quantify the amounts of microplastics they were removing. Well, this would be a great thing to do with school kids, where they could go out and have a field trip once a week to teach them about this. We have to change the culture on this. So anyway, I'm just throwing out some ideas to you because I love what you're doing. And I
appreciate that. Yeah, of course. And the question is, what do you do with the microfibers that are collected by the washing machine so that they don't, leak into the environment elsewhere? But I think it's a really interesting idea, and definitely gives me some ideas. So
we can add. Yeah.
I'd love to learn more about that, especially like we trap it, but then how do we ensure that it's not still leaking into the environment from like landfills or incinerators, which
Well, we should add it to that 4% we recycle now, because it's a paltry 4%. And anything we can add to that will make it 5%. So I really think we have to start small, but end up big. And if we do that with every washing machine in the country, eventually we will have eliminated a major source of microplastics. As I look at the satellite view of looking at this issue, that's probably one of the areas we can do the most. The next will be retrofitting roads and bridges to pans that will collect the tire wear particles or divert them into stormwater ponds. If we can do those two things, we'll eliminate two of your major microplastics that are dominating what's in the environment. That's not everything, but those are two quick solutions I see. But I really love what you're doing, and keep it on.
Yeah, thank you. And right back at you.
Thank you.
As well. Thank you.
I'm afraid that we have to move on to the discussion portion of our meeting, but please put your questions in the chat and we will circle back. So Dustin, do you want to, let's start.
Yeah, thank you all. And I think I really appreciate all of the questions and the discussion that we've had so far. I think that starts to get into the things that I was hoping we might just have a few minutes to talk about and get your reflections while these ideas are fresh in your mind. The overarching question is, are there opportunities with government organizations, academia, and public health to partnership and think about leveraging and actions to reduce human exposure and health risks. And so I want to invite people to talk about some ideas, and I've got some additional things to help prompt some thoughts, including, are there interventions that you would like to do but require information or capacity or the expertise of others? And what is that missing piece for you? Or, we all work for decision makers. A lot of us do, or some of us are decision makers, not me. But we need to convince decision makers that there's a plastic or a microplastic problem that your organization needs to address. What information is necessary and persuasive to clearly define the problem? Or maybe you're just at the beginning and need to figure out, where do I start? Does anybody want to jump in and kind of share some of their thoughts on those needs?
Oh, should we call on people? That's always my favorite tool, because there's a lot of opinionated people on this call in the best of ways. I'm sure that somebody wants to say something.
I see.
Morgan said we have to start shifting the narrative around risk aversion. Can you say more about that, Morgan? Can you get on and talk a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I think about how litigious we are and how risk averse we are because of that. And we're risk averse in favor of industry, and we don't want regulators to get sued. But I think that we have got a heck of a task in front of us of convincing people that the risk to human and environmental health is going to supersede the risk of being sued by industry. And we see this throughout history, where time and time again, the environmentalists have been right about things. And so it's really a massive shift in how we view these problems and how we talk about them. And we've got to start convincing people that the worst thing actually isn't being sued by industry. It's finding out that you contributed to a massive issue of human and environmental life.
Okay, thank you. Yes, risk framing is always a huge thing, and then moving it categorically. We have David and then Lyda. David, please go ahead.
Hi, David Pater. I'm retired, but a member of the Stormwater SIL Public Committee, and used to work with the SIL in my last job at the Department of Commerce. But I also spent my last years at the Department of Ecology after 30 years working in solid waste management. So yeah, thanks to all the presenters. Gives me some optimism that we can make some headway on this problem, because we're dealing with a plastic infrastructure that's been in place my entire lifetime. I'm nearly 65, and that's a pretty hard thing to overcome. I'm not sure if anybody, I'm a member of a climate group here in Seattle, and so there was a meeting last week in Colombia of 60 countries. It was called the TAF Group, Transitioning Away from Fossil Fuels. Basically, these countries got sick of being blockaded at the COP conferences that have gone on for 30 plus years by the fossil fuel industry and the petrostates. Saudi Arabia, United States is a petrostate, by the way, too. So I guess I see some process like that, at least globally or nationally, that maybe can be applied to some aspects of the problems with plastic. Definitely encouraged by the PSNAP group. I'm glad they're around, and I think that's a great thing to build upon in terms of providing more education and outreach and what plastic is doing in a public health issue. And I think also from a reuse issue, I think there's opportunities there's a lot more NGOs and for-profit companies that are involved in the reuse game than there used to be a number of years ago. It's really grown quite a bit, and I think there's opportunities there to work with a lot of private companies. But just throwing out some different ideas there that could keep the momentum going and expand what's going on here.
Okay, thank you, David. Lyda?
Yeah, just huge shout out to all of the presenters today. Great content. I think one of the things that is often perhaps overlooked, especially with the AI discussions, is that we have all of the solutions today. We don't necessarily need new technology to fix these things. We just need to move away from the old way of doing things. And what I work in sustainability now for a municipality, but one of the things that is really strongly evident is that oftentimes the people at those smaller municipalities aren't necessarily included in the conversation, especially around like the built environment. So when you're building new buildings, or when you're thinking about these stormwater solutions, or you're thinking about perhaps more ecologically friendly ways of doing things, oftentimes the contractors say, oh, we've always done it X way, and it's really up to the customer, so in this case like a municipality or entity, to push for the stronger environmental actions. And without that knowledge base, or without that ability for those municipalities to be informed, they're not going to push. They're going to say, oh, the contractor knows best, or the architect knows best. And I think that there is some miscommunication between wants of all of those different entities. So I think one of the missing pieces is that private public partnership, that municipality partnership. And then also moving away from the narrative of we need new technology, to look at all of these other countries, or these places that have put in a system that really works, and like how can we implement that in our smaller space, rather than trying to fix everything all at once, because that's immensely harder to do.
Thank you. So maybe there are simpler, more mechanical ways of dealing. Like are you referring to like very, very small countries, or countries that don't have a lot of resources that are finding ingenious ways of addressing this? Or are you just...
No, like if you look at Japan, for example, they have, they site source everything. And so it is a policy, but it is also a behavior change, and behavior change is the hardest way to make any systematic change. But I'm not talking about tiny countries that are doing it. I'm talking about examples of perhaps different ways of utilizing the systems that we already have in place that are
quite successful. And when you look at like plastic pollution, the microplastic in marine systems, whichever one of those problems, it is a wicked problem. There are numerous issues. You're never going to find one blanket thing that works. And so taking the lessons learned from other places and applying them in very like smaller entities to build that trust with the community and to show that it does work, oftentimes garners a lot larger impact than other approaches.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Thank you, Lida.
Thanks, Lida.
Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Heidi. Just a couple of comments on the risk averse and being sued, that type of thing. We developed a pesticide site for the 100 most frequently used or purchased pesticides at Walmart and Lowe's, because EPA will not put out a ranking of a pesticide that's registered for use because it's considered safe if you follow the label. So what we did is we took EPA's risk assessment guidelines for human health, environmental health, and honeybees, number of things. Long story short, we put out a website where consumers could go on and determine what pesticide they could use in a area, like particularly along the coast. You could actually put in your address, and if the label says do not use near water, you would not use that pesticide. I got legal advice on that. I had to from the university and some other lawyers, and we were told as long as you use the word safe, you're not connotating hazard. And at least that, now nobody ever challenged us in court on that, but I will just tell you, we use that site, and so I would just say something like that, because by themselves, microplastics per se are not that toxic. They would be at the low end of the toxicity scale. It's when they're in combination with other things. The second comment I'll make, most of y'all probably on this call are not old enough to remember how we started recycling. It wasn't adults that started that, it was kids at school. And they drugged their parents. I was one of those parents, grudgingly, to start recycling. We got to be thinking of alternatives to engage those kids in school, because they're the ones, this is a long-term change. And to get us going in that direction, we have to let them lead the change. We can help them, we can guide them, we're smart, and we can teach them about it. But if we, and that will really be the ultimate preventive strategy we'll invoke, in my opinion.
Okay. Yes, definitely. And we're almost out of time unless you want to hang on a little bit longer. But I wanted to offer an opportunity for Elise to speak up, because Elise, I know you had trouble getting in. Is there anything that you want to add here before Dustin closes out?
Oh, thank you. Oh, I had so many thoughts when people were speaking and I can only hear on the audio, but let me think. I do want to give a shout out for Lida's point that we really do have solutions available to us. I think there's a lot of talk about trying to reinvent the wheel, but if we look around the world, there's a lot already in progress. And if we look to other states, that sort of thing, yeah, I do think it's important that we pay attention to what options have already been tried, and sometimes it's in other spheres, that it may not be specific to microplastic, but sometimes we can use strategies that have been implemented for other things around this issue. So yeah,
that's a good point.
Thanks, Elise.
Mike. Oh,
yeah, go ahead and add the final thought there if you'd like, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to kind of underline 2 points that I made that I think are really important. One, Safer Products for Washington program has been very effective in setting restrictions on toxic chemicals that can contaminate water bodies like Puget Sound. So I think continuing to expand this program, I think, is critical to protect public health and aquatic ecosystems. And so that's one point. And then the second point I wanted to underline is, ecology has a real opportunity right now to reduce microplastics, to set restrictions on PVC and PVDC plastic and packaging. You know, we were concerned that the state proposed delaying action by 5 or more years, and we really hope that ecology will reconsider it, because we think that this is a real low-hanging fruit opportunity to begin to tackle the microplastics problem here in Washington State. We know there are safer alternatives available. We know that many businesses have already restricted these plastics, so there's no reason why we can't move this forward more quickly. So I just wanted to underline those 2 points because I think we have an opportunity to make real progress using this innovative program that is leading the nation in many ways.
Thanks, Mike. These are some great ideas. Thank you, everybody. And if you have something that comes to you later and want to email that to Heidi and I too, we totally appreciate that. All of these ideas are things that we're gathering and going to be putting into our strategy. So I just want to wrap things up here for us since we're just a few minutes past time. Before we have any other workshops, Heidi and I are going to take some time to really dig into all of the great presentations that we've had through our last 3 workshops and try and synthesize that so that we can bring you all something to react to when we meet again, which is probably going to be September-ish. I know everybody's got a lot going on in the summer times, and those are difficult times to hold big workshops like this. And we've got a lot of work to do on this, as well as lots of other things that our team is engaged with at the moment. So I want to just put a plug into there to keep an eye out for more communication from us here this summer. We will endeavor to get the recordings going and are available, and our notes and stuff following up from this as soon as possible. So
Yes,
thank you.
Ditto.
Yeah. Thank you very much to all of our speakers today. Thank you very much to all of our participants who worked through the change of from Zooms to Teams and all of the technical challenges. We appreciate your patience, and we apologize for that confusion and inconvenience.